The Silver-Haired Hero by Arikima. Chapter 1. The End and the Beginning. A group of people were quickly running through an underground structure. At the front was an elderly man who looked ragged after intense fighting. Once wearing a suit of armor, only the arm guards remained. The rest had been forcibly ripped off by something. Despite looking ancient, strong muscles still held firm under his thin skin. Visible through a tattered white shirt, he ran alongside a much younger girl, both of them visibly related, sharing the same shade of bright silver hair and blue eyes. The elder's hair was long and tied with black string. It flowed behind him as he ran. The girl was in her late teens and wearing a much lighter set of chainmail with long silver hair flowing over her shoulders and down her back. A more armored collar, shoulder, forearms and thighs adorned her over-polished links of chainmail. Trailing behind them was a tall man in more simple chainmail, face hidden behind a visored helmet, and a shorter young man in church robes. Orange shaggy hair bounced around half-pointed ears with each of his steps. The ground shook as they ran across the tiled stone floor, a wisp of golden flame above them providing light. Around a corner which was the last turn before their escape was blocked with two men in armored robes and solid iron masks covering their faces, each wielding short swords, and they darted forwards to intercept the fleeing party. The elderly man jutted forwards and drew a two-handed sword off of his hip and met the first of these vile cultists, parrying and cutting them down with ease. The tall man drew a sword of his own and met the other cultist as their friend in church robes grabbed onto a symbol of a vibrant star hanging around his neck. He muttered a prayer and a bolt of radiant white light shot forth, catching the cultist in the back, allowing the tall man to cut him down. Suddenly, however, the ground shook again. A loud crash was heard as the ceiling caved in at the end of the large room, revealing a hulking figure in black armor wielding a massive onyx greatsword. An aura of wrongness enveloped this black knight. The silver-haired teenager took a stance in front and exhaled a cloud of frost, which formed together into an arming sword and heater shield in her hands. The tall man and orange-haired cleric both froze at the sight of this black knight. Terror taking over their spirits, and the same look of gripping fear spread across the teenage girl's face, as well as recognition of who stood before them set in. "The Godslayer," the cleric managed to rasp out as he clutched his holy symbol tight. The black knight before them rose to his feet and stared. Only black emptiness laid behind the visor of his helmet. Unnatural darkness followed his movements as if the world itself is repulsed by his presence. As the three stood frozen in fear, the elderly man took a step forwards in front of his much younger relative. "Mark, take her and run. I will face him," he said in an authoritative voice. The tall warrior nodded as the girl began to protest. "What? No," as she was suddenly swept off her feet. Mark, the tall man in a suit of chainmail and visored helmet, held on to her. "Go with them, Gildor," the elderly man said. The half-elven cleric nodded and gulped before quickly following them. Before the Black Knight could intercept the three running around him, the elderly man suddenly rushed forwards in a torrent of golden fire, hot enough to leave the stone floor glowing as his longsword made contact with the Black Knight's own great sword held in a single hand. The Black Knight moved to grab the elderly man's face with a dark gauntlet, but they spun around each other and the elder kicked back to make distance. Now coming around was Mark and Gildor, the sliver-haired teen still in Mark's arm trying to break free. She was lifted over his shoulder as they began running towards the hallway, now that it was clear. "Stop, we can't leave him," she shouted as she was hammering her fist into Mark's back. Ice forming with each hit she made. "He'll die if we do," she cried, tears in her eyes the only thing touching her that was not freezing. The elderly man stared down the Black Knight before sighing deeply. He tightened the grip he had on his sword, the muscles under his skin taut as steel cables. "You will not take another step beyond me," he said with unyielding determination. After a moment of silence, the Black Knight stood straight. A darkness beyond what any mortal could fully perceive filled the inside of its helmet as a gravely voice spoke out. "The great and mighty hero, our blades finally cross paths." They took a single step forward, and the elderly man focused. Runes of blue flame began to form around him, landing on his shoulders, chest, back, legs, and feet. An aura of bright yellow fire ignited and shifted to a deep, rich, ethereal amber. Light faintly shed as the symbol of a phoenix appeared within his chest, visible despite it residing where his heart would be. "You will not survive this fight, hero," the Godslayer said in an even worse voice than previously. All emotion aside from malice left. "I do not need to survive," the elder said. "I have already lived my life, but I will not stand and allow you to end theirs." Behind them, wild shards of ice began flying from the hall the others ran from. The girl cried, "Grandpa, stop! I won't ever forgive you if you die." With a distraught voice, hearing her only firmed the elder's resolve even further. Suddenly, the Black Knight shifted his weight and moved. The elder, Akai Ryneveld, knew today would be his last. However, it was not the end of his story. His story on how he became the greatest hero of the Second Age of this world. A young boy around 6 years in age lay in a golden wheat field. Shaggy silver hair adorning his head. He was panting as a girl his own age fell onto the soft orange grass next to him, her brown hair laid out beneath her head. The two lie there, catching their breaths. A magnificent ancient oak tree resided in the middle of this field. Many marks show where the villagers had tried to cut it down, but not even their steel axe heads could do more than leave a little scratch in its bark. Its leaves rustled in the wind, and its shade protected these two kids from the sun's rays. After they lay resting, the girl slowly sat up. She had a bright smile on her face and said, "Did you hear the news yet, Akai?" The young boy, Akai, sat up and shook his head. "No, what's going on, Lamori?" To which she slowly began to stand back up. She clasped her hands behind her back and leaned in to say, "There's finally another kid moving into our village. Not another baby or young adult." Lamori grinned with a smile missing a single baby tooth. Akai's blue eyes lit up and he quickly rose to his own feet. He excitedly asked, "When? Do you know their name yet?" And Lamori shook her head. She said, "Sometime tomorrow," before something behind Akai caught her attention. The girl began running off again, and Akai quickly turned to chase after her. Down a dirt path, he saw his mother Jennifer waving at them. Jennifer wearing a green and brown dress and her long silky brown hair tied into a loose bun behind her head. "Akai, Lamori, dinner's ready," she called, and Lamori only picked up the pace as the two kids ran. That night, Lamori and her parents ate together at Akai's home. A small 2-story house on the northeast edge of their little village, separated by a field from the inner village. It was close to the logging site, which worked well. Akai's father, Ray, a former scout in the Ligonian Royal Army, now worked as a woodsman for this village. They had moved in around the same time Akai came around, given this land as reward for his deeds in the army. Lamori sat and ate her soup happily with her parents. Drake Holt, the village's foremost blacksmith, and his wife, Emmy, who helped in the forge and made simple jewelry on her own time. Ray said, "The only thing I know about the new family moving in is the father is a retired army officer. He's a bit older than us, but his son is around our kids' age." The two families enjoyed each other's company and soon retired to bed. That night, Akai had the first of many recurring dreams. He dreamt he was a young man in an army, stubble across his chin and his silver hair cut short, wearing a suit of blue armor and equipped with an arming sword and heater shield. The crest of a phoenix adorned his chest plate as he rode on a horse behind a more experienced man through an army encampment. "Son, what you see before you will one day all be yours. The Phoenix clan has always been a loyal vassal for our king, defending the border to the north. The rest may not know it yet, but the king has listed our clan as candidates to inherit the throne." "Father, shouldn't the prince inherit the throne?" the young knight in blue armor asked. "No, the prince has unfortunately fallen ill. The disease is not one that will kill him, but it will destroy his mind in time. The king has been unable to sire another heir, so he regrettably must pass his legacy onto one of the vassal clans." The young knight pursed his lips as he thought about what this meant. If they were candidates, how would candidates be selected? Before he spoke up to ask just that question, the older and more experienced man ahead of him said, "When the time comes, the king will decide. If all the vassal clans are not in agreement on which candidate will ascend, A tournament between our champions will be held. An icy breeze fell across the army camp from the mountains to the north, and the young knight nodded. He looked over the horizon and said, "Until then, I will be ready to defend when the tyrants to our north inevitably try to lay siege once again." The rest of Akai's dream followed this young knight as he rode through the camp, ultimately reaching a large tent in the center. Hitching his horse, he climbed down and walked inside. Inside, warmth from a fire filled the space as wood crackled within an iron brazier. Along one of the edges stood a mirror engraved with odd runes on its edges. The young knight knew it held magic, but right now it was unpowered. The knight stared at his own reflection and saw amber-yellow eyes staring back. Come morning, Akai rushed to eat the breakfast his mother made, a fried egg from a neighbor's chickens and a pancake with nuts in it. When the young boy finished, he gave his mother a hug and left to be sure he could meet the new kid in town. It was early autumn as he ran into the village. There, he saw the house the new family would be moving into. Akai still missed the old man that lived there all alone, but he was happy the place wasn't going to stay empty. There they saw a familiar sight, a military carriage bringing in the new family. After the last campaign, many soldiers had earned the right to a parcel of land, and this officer was no different. He decided to join their village, and Akai would be sure to welcome them with open arms. He saw a tall man in dress uniform step out of the carriage. He was striking to look at. His face was sharp and told a story of many long years of harsh military life. The insignia on his coat marked him as an auxiliary commander, someone who was a very high rank in the royal army, beneath only a legion commander who themselves were only beneath the generals of the royal army. He had well-kept short vermilion red hair and beard. His brown eyes still held a sharp gaze of authority. Many of the villagers were speaking about how they were surprised someone like this was moving into their little village and not into a mansion in the cities. But they gasped when he turned and offered a hand to his wife, a beautiful woman wearing a dress. She had visibly worn hands, the hands of a worker and not the soft hands of a noble. Her hands trembled faintly for a moment until they landed in her husband's, and he gave her stability. She carefully stepped out of the carriage. Long locks of auburn orange hair fell from her head, and stark red eyes looked around at the village. Behind them was a kid in a shirt and vest. He had his father's vibrant red hair and his mother's equally vibrant red eyes. His father soon laid eyes on Akai and pointed him out to their son. Akai froze a bit, but smiled as the young boy soon came running over. Akai held out his hand and said, "Hi, my name is Akai. What is yours?" And the kid approached and stood for a moment before taking Akai's hand and shaking it. "My name is Kid." From the left rang out Lamori's giggle as she said, "Kid? You're a kid named Kid?" As she approached with amusement on her face, Kid's face turned a bit red as he snapped back, "Hey, it's not funny. I was named after my grandfather." Akai couldn't help but laugh a bit as the two got to know Kid a little better, asking him questions such as what his favorite food was, how old he is, and where he lived before this. They learned off of it and more. Over the next few weeks, Kid slowly settled in and quickly became good friends with Akai and Lamori. The two learned Kid's dream was to grow up and be as successful of a soldier as his father was. Lamori wanted to become a master smith and work for the royal family, becoming rich enough to let her parents retire and live like nobles. Akai himself remembered the dream he had the night before. He hadn't really thought of what he wanted to be when he grew up, but he felt a calling to it. He wanted to become a heroic knight one day, to protect everyone from tyranny. Chapter 2. New Guest. 2 years later, Akai was an 8-year-old boy. He and Kid had become good friends and often practiced their swordsmanship, practicing in the same field the village militia used for their training. Young men and some women of the village who practiced with weapons, ready to defend against threats. Though none of them were warriors, they were normal people with no real ambition to fight, only to stay in enough shape to have a chance. This morning, however, Akai was not going to be training. He was pulling a pair of boots on as he and his father were getting ready to go hunting. Akai hadn't gone hunting before, but he had begged to come along this time. He had proven good enough with a bow that his father Ray had agreed. Coming with them was Lamori's father Drake, who had a crossbow, And Kid's father, Liam, who was coming mostly because his wife insisted. Christy had insisted Liam go as she worked with Akai's mother, Jennifer, to prepare for the meat they bring back. Drake's wife, Emmy, remained at the forge, taking over the day's work temporarily. The 3 men and 1 boy headed north into the woods. Akai was rather excited to finally join a hunting trip. A hand landed on Akai's shoulder, and he looked up at his father as they walked. "Don't be too nervous, Akai. We're hunting cabers. They're not the most difficult prey to catch. Just don't get too close, okay?" Akai nodded his head, and Drake butted in. "Cabers are some of the most delicious things to put in stew. When I heard Jennifer wanted to make some for us, I almost jumped for joy. Don't tell Emmy, but she isn't half as good at cooking as Jennifer was." Liam chuckled and said, "I'll be sure to tell her." And Drake looked back with an exaggerated expression of betrayal. He even put a hand on his chest. The others chuckled at his expression. Ray lifted a hand and said, "Getting close, quiet," and stalked through the woods quietly. Soon they stumbled upon a small mountain stream, and Akai looked over a bush and saw their prey. In front of them was a kaba, a creature that looked kind of like a rabbit with long floppy ears, but it had sharp teeth and more forward eyes. Its paws had sharp claws, and white spikes ran along its back, contrasting a dark brown fur. It had a long tail behind it that currently was dipped into the stream. The kaba turned around and pulled out its tail, a large crayfish grasping the end of it. As it pounced the crayfish and began to bite into it, Ray gently tapped Akai's shoulder and motioned for him to take a shot. Akai nodded again, raising his short recurve bow. Nocking an arrow, he carefully stepped beside the bush and slowly began drawing it back. He exhaled, and when he felt confident in the shot, the broad-headed arrow flew. It struck the kaba, and the animal began letting out whining squeaks as it began trying to run away. But the shock from being hit was disrupting its ability to run well. It slipped and stumbled a while as the others began walking after it. Less than 100 yards from where Akai had shot the kaba, it lay still and panting as it was bleeding out. "Here, son, you need to put it out of its misery. It would be cruel to make it suffer more. Remember how I taught you to do it," Ray said, drawing a knife and handing it to Akai handle first. Akai took it and took a deep breath. He approached the kaba and watched as it failed to get up and run and was kicking weakly to try and keep him away. Akai frowned but leaned in, putting his weight on it to hold it still, and drove the knife in, stabbing its heart. He held it as it grew weaker and soon enough died. Akai wiped off his father's knife and gave it back. He felt strange about killing it now that he had actually done so, but Ray patted his back and said, "You did good. Don't feel bad either. I know that look on your face." As Liam was tying its legs together and picking it up, Ray said, "The land provides these animals for us to eat. We show respect by making sure they don't suffer too much and by not wasting any of it." Drake nodded and said, I'll be tanning the hide and Emmy will make tools from the bones. The organs we don't eat go to the pets, and the rest gets eaten by us." The 4 continued their hunt, catching a second kaba. The second one started running towards them, and Akai panicked, missing his bow. As Ray readied his bow, Drake got it with his crossbow, pinning it to the dirt as it was about to jump. Liam tied its leg and bled it before carrying both over their shoulder. Content with the amount of meat they have, Liam tied its legs and carried both of the cabers over his shoulder. Now around 7 a.m., when they got back, the sun was low in the sky, but plenty of sunlight. Though, when the group were coming back home, Jennifer ran up to Ray a bit frantically. Ray, someone is in the tool shed," she said in a hushed yell. Immediately the 3 men went tense, and Ray said, "Jenny, take Akai inside." Akai wanted to protest, wanting to help what was going on, but Jennifer grabbed his wrist and began ushering him inside. Akai quickly ran up to his bedroom upstairs and watched from his bedroom window. Akai watched as Ray approached the door, followed by Liam. Drake pulled a bolt from his quiver and stood off to the side, ready to help in case things go wrong with his crossbow. As Ray approached the shed, he heard the sound of someone shuffling inside. He put a hand on the knife in the sheath on his belt and grabbed the door. He opened it suddenly, expecting to see someone trying to hide or rush past him to escape. Well, he did see someone trying to hide, but it was not who he thought it would be. Trying to hide in the corner behind leaned brooms, rakes, and shovels. He saw a kid. Not Akai's age, this one was around 14. The notable thing was she was covered in bandages. He could see her blue eyes filled with terror. She was shaking in place, clothed only with bandages, wool cloak, and a pair of trousers entirely too large for her. Seeing Ray freeze, Liam leaned in, and his eyes widened at the sight of this girl. He looked back at Drake and shouted, "Go fetch Jennifer and Christy. Tell them to bring a blanket." And Drake was a bit startled by the urgency in his voice. But the blacksmith nodded and quickly jogged inside. Soon the women came out. Akai saw over the next few minutes as the adults coaxed a shaking, scared girl out of the shed and brought her inside. He wanted to head downstairs, but after a few moments, Ray was on the other side of his door as Akai opened it. Ray said, "Stay in your room, Akai. I get you probably want to help, but let your mum handle this. Okay." Akai reluctantly nodded and stayed in his room. He hears some of the talking going on downstairs, hearing his mum and Christy both asking this girl questions. What her name was, where she came from, why she was hiding. Akai's curiosity was burning, so he sat by his open door and tried his best to listen. His father, who was also banished from being downstairs, sat and listened as well. They heard a soft, squeaky voice tremble out some of the answers. "My name is Lacey. I ran away from some awful, awful people. I didn't know where else to go. I'm scared." Jennifer and Christy took a few moments comforting the teenager before Akai heard with keen hearing, "Goodness, you're covered in cuts and bruises." After almost an hour, Jennifer called out, "Ray, Akai, come down. I need you two to fetch some medicine." Akai and Ray quickly got up and headed downstairs where they saw the girl. She had tangled strawberry blonde hair that Christy was currently gently brushing, and some of her bandages had been pulled back, revealing various scars. Lacey even had burn scars across her face that she was trying to hide. Akai didn't realize he was staring, and Jennifer piped up, "Akai, go with your father," in a stern tone, shocking him back to his senses, and Akai nodded, running out the front door to catch up with Ray. Ray had a solemn look on his face after seeing the state this girl was in. As Akai and Ray quickly made way to the village's primary herbalist, Jennifer sat down across from Lacey and spoke softly. Christy is still gently brushing the knots out of the girl's unkempt hair. "What can you tell us about the people you ran away from?" she asked in as gentle of a voice as she could. Lacey shuddered, but Christy chimed in, "We want to protect you from them. Nobody who can do what they've done to you can be any good." "It's okay, Lacey." Lacey's emerald green eyes rose to meet Jennifer's gentle hazel eyes as she began to tell her story. "When I was a girl, my parents were far too poor to raise me or my siblings. I was a little sickly, so I couldn't work, so they sold me off to a group. I don't remember their name, but a bastard named Kel bought me. He runs a gang of outlaws and—" The way they could see Lacey trembling, Jennifer gently put a hand on her shoulder and said, "You don't need to say more about that." Gently. Lacey had tears welling up in her eyes and eventually mentioned, "Kel is awakened with sorcery. He never let me out of his sight unless I was chained up. It's been about 6 winters, but he finally made a mistake, and I had been running through the forest for over a week. This house on the edge of the village is the first building I saw, and I just wanted to rest. But seeing you all, I panicked and tried to hide." Jennifer brought Lacey in for a gentle hug, softly stroking the girl's back, saying, "It's okay, you can stay with us, and we'll make sure that Kel never comes to hurt you again." When Akai and Ray returned with a medicinal salve, they were sent upstairs again. Akai sat on his bed as his father sat in a chair on the other side of the room. Akai knew his father didn't know much more than he did, so they were stuck waiting until Jennifer and Christy were done helping Lacey until they could figure out what was going on. And when they did, Akai felt angry about hearing what this Kel monster did. Akai had always been a cheerful kid, so this anger was new to him. He felt burning in his chest at the thought of someone who'd brutalize a girl like Lacey. A literal feeling of heat welled within him for a moment, but soon relieved when he suggested, "She can stay with us," and his parents agreed with no contest. Ray put a hand to his chin and said, "Though we don't really have much room." Before Akai butted in, "She can have my room. We have space in the attic from when Auntie Emmy ran Uncle Drake out of the house. I don't mind sleeping there." Jennifer and Ray looked at each other, not seeming ecstatic about the idea, but Ray shrugged and said, "I don't see why not. We can figure out a better solution later, but that works for now." Jennifer nodded and agreed. Now that Akai was allowed back downstairs, he saw Christy putting Lacey's now brushed hair into a braid. Lacey was wearing one of his mother's dresses under the wool cloak as Jennifer made her way to the kitchen. Liam having already dressed the cabers, she was getting the food prepared. Akai locked eyes with Lacey for a moment. She then turned her gaze away after staring at his silver hair for a moment. People seemed to do that for some reason when first seeing him after seeing his parents. Akai left the house, heading to his and Kid's usual hangout spot. Seeing Lamori already there, sitting on the fence with a bored look as Kid was doing sword drills with a wooden sword. Akai took a training sword from the rack and joined him, beginning to share the story about what happened. "Yeah, our dads mentioned something about that when they got back from the hunt," Lamori said, finally perking up a bit. "Something about a strange girl in bandages hiding in your shed." "Did you get a good look at her, Akai?" Kid asked, bringing his sword down in overhead strikes one after another. "Not really. She was covered in bandages and a cloak when I saw her, but she had green eyes and yellow hair." Lamori asked, "Yellow hair?" before Kid sighed and said, "Yellow hair is called blonde hair, guys." "Oh, that's what blonde hair means," Lamori said. Kid looked unamused before shaking his head. He previously lived in the city north of the mountain, so he had a better grasp on the outside world. Blonde hair was not common in this part of the world, so kids who had never left this small village before wouldn't have known. "I wonder how ugly she is if she hides under a bunch of bandages," Kid muttered, before suddenly a wooden sword smacked into his shoulder. "Don't be rude, Kid," Akai scolded him. Kid rubbed his shoulder and said, "I was just joking, geez." Lamori muttered, "My dad said she was covered in scars, though." Before Akai's mom shooed him away, he saw her face and she had burns all over it. "Yeah, and she told us who did it," Akai said, tightening the grip on his training sword a bit more. "What? Who did?" Kid asked, stopping his sword drills to face Akai. The two 8-year-olds looked at each other, and Akai halted his sword drills as well. He turned to face Kid and Lamari and began to retell the story of what happened. By the time he finished retelling the story, Lamari looked horrified, and Kid had a dark look in his eyes. For the rest of the day, Akai and Kid were sparring more fiercely than usual, Lamori staying by in case they got hurt. Chapter 3: Fiery Awakening. Another 2 years had passed since Lacey first arrived. Lacey was now 16. Akai, Kid, and Lamori were 10 years old. By this time, Lamori was apprenticing in her parents' blacksmith. Kid was training his swordsmanship full-time, and Akai was working with the sawmill when he was not hanging around Lamori's forge or the training field with Kid. This morning, Akai was in his bed. He had regained his bedroom while the family built a small extension to their home, giving Lacey her own room on the ground floor. He had his recurring dream again. This time something of note was happening. Akai dreamt he was the blue-armored knight, which he now knew was the son of the head of the Phoenix clan, whatever that was. Nobody knew anything about a clan by that name. Liam is the only one who knew what a phoenix even was. An extremely rare creature of legend he had read about once in the capital city's library. Right now, the knight was rising from his tent, the smell of smoke wafting through the war camp. He had no time to don his plate armor, so he threw on a chainmail shirt, grabbed his sword and shield, then head out to find enemy soldiers storming the war camp. A team of heavily armored warriors rushing his tent, with his father not here, the unnamed knight was the one in charge. He felt fear about being outnumbered, but he felt confidence in his skill and strength to repel them and the rest of the attack. Using his shield to block 2 of the 5 men's spears and rushed in, heat rising inside of him as he exerted himself. Bashing the edge of his shield onto one to break their stance, he slipped his sword past their guard easily, the blade snaking its way through a gap in their armor and piercing through the padding beneath their uniforms of primarily metal scales. The nameless knight stepped back and expertly shifted and dodged around incoming attacks and using his shield to keep those pesky spears at bay. He worked his way around until he had an opening and rushed in, managing to strike down one spearman and dodge a thrust of a sword before he took down the other. leaving only 2 of the 5 enemy warriors meant to deal with him. The knight saw the fear mounting in the enemy's eyes, and he felt reluctant to do more than just wound them. But he had to steel himself, knowing if he didn't deal with them, they'd happily kill him and likely leave his head on a pike for his father to find. This silver-haired knight gritted his teeth, and the heat within him grew more and more. Enough that wisps of a yellow flame began forming around him, trailing his movements. With an explosive speed, the knight rushed in, disarming the soldier he initially targeted, grabbing his collar and pulling him in the line of the other soldier's attack. His ally now literally disarming the soldier, making him fall to his knees, yelling in pain, clutching the wound. The knight moved, parrying a second strike and ignoring the last one standing's curses. He parried with his sword and thrust the edge of his shield forwards in a punch, with enough force to break the man's ribs under his armor. He fell to his knees, and the knight swiped his sword, opening up the last one's throat before he put the one-armed man still yelling out of his misery. The knight scowled, hating the feeling of ending lives. The only thing keeping him from risking himself to fight them without a sword was the sense of duty he felt to protect this border. He yelled out, calling to his men to repel the attack. Yelling this command a few times, the soldiers away from the edge, where a force was rushing in, began moving to fight them off. The knight himself ran to join the defense, striking down every enemy soldier he saw, wearing the white and gold colors of the north. His own men wearing green and gold. When heading towards the edge of the camp, he finally heard a horn sound from the distance, and the soldiers attacking his camp began leaving. He looked up towards the hill and met eyes with the enemy commander. The knight stood with silver hair and amber eyes among his men, fire faintly burning around him as an aura. At the crest of the hill stood a woman with waist-length white hair, deep, beautiful blue eyes glared back, as frost filled the air around her as an aura of intense coldness. She wore a white and gold lamella war dress, which the knight got a good look at, as she turned around and led her men to retreat. The battle only a harassment and failed assassination. Akai soon woke up in his bed, feeling confused as it felt like intense heat within his chest carried over from the dream to real life for a moment. But it swiftly cooled down as he began to fully regain his awareness. Akai was 10, and his hair was fairly shaggy by this point. He was letting it grow out. When he washed his face, he saw his own blue eyes staring back instead of the amber eyes of the knight in his dream he often became. Today was another day where Akai was joining his father on a kaba hunt, just the 2 of them. He got out of bed quickly and began to get dressed, grabbing his bow, then heading out to the woods with his father joining him, unaware of the band of people coming in from the south. It was about an hour later when Akai and Ray were returning, already catching a kaba pretty quickly. Ray taking the shot this time, and being a former scout, his archery was far better than Akai's. As they came closer to the edge of the forest, they saw smoke rising through the air. A fear began to grip Akai's and Ray's hearts as they picked up the pace. As they left the edge of the forest, Akai and Ray noticed men wearing basic armor walking through the streets, lighting buildings on fire. Some groups were fighting with the militia members, but there was a group heading up the road towards Akai's house. Both Akai and Ray readied their bows and began trying to get closer to his home without being seen. Inside the house, Jennifer, Emmy, Lamory, and Lacey were all together talking before they saw the group walking up the road from the window. Lacey, by this point, had become a beautiful young lady. She still wore bandages around her arms, where her skin was left sensitive from scar tissue. But her strawberry blonde hair and emerald green eyes were no longer hidden by her, even if her face had burn scars still on it. "Quick, everyone, we need to hide," Lacey quietly called out. Next thing the girls did was move. Jennifer grabbed Lacey and began heading upstairs as Emmy grabbed her daughter Lamory and followed behind. The 4 of them moved to hide. Jennifer hid Lacey in the back of the attic before finding another place for herself. Emmy and Lamory hid one in the storage room and one in Akai's room, hiding behind or under furniture. Less than a minute passed when they settled in their spots. Did one of these bandits kick in the front door, breaking the latch that held it closed? "Listen, we know you're in here. Come out and we won't be too hard on you." As he marched in, followed by a number of other bandits, the men began ransacking the house, looking for the people they knew lived here. South, many of the village's buildings were catching fire as the bandits threw lit torches on the roofs. Outside, they heard a man yell, "Let's smoke 'em out," before throwing a torch on the roof of Akai's family home, the flame not taking long to begin spreading to the wooden shingles. As they did this, Ray and Akai moved to try and stay out of sight. Akai felt his chest swell with heat as he grew angrier about the situation. It wasn't long until the bandits first pulled out Jennifer, tossing her onto the dirt in front of the house, and said, "Found one wench, but it isn't the girl," before heading back inside. Next, they did the same with Emmy and Lamori, tossing them onto the dirt. Bandits outside grabbed them and wrapped their wrists and ankles with rope and left them sitting on the grass by the shed. Emmy looked at the bandit who touched Lamori with an intense hatred that even made the man flinch despite her being tied up. "Is that everyone?" asked a tall man with dusty blonde hair. He was wearing a much nicer suit of armor compared to the rest of these men. Where his men mostly had axes and hammers, he had a longsword on his waist. He had brown eyes that radiated wickedness as he stared at the home with the roof burning, the fire spreading. Before one of the other bandits called it, they heard Lacey scream from the attic. Moments later, she was also brought outside. Lacey was not thrown down into the dirt and tied up, however. The young teenager was held and kept standing by the bandit that grabbed her. "Found her, boss," the guy said with a dark tone to his voice. The boss, who Lacey met eyes with and immediately trembled visibly in fear, was Kel, the man who was the source of her numerous scars across her body. He smiled and leaned in, gripping her face with one hand as he turned her head, inspecting her like she was not even a living person. "Still disgusting, but not nearly as so," he muttered. Just then, a scuffle was heard behind the shed, and everyone turned to face it. Thrown from around the corner was Ray by one of the numerous bandits that approached their home. The bandit stepped out and was dragging Akai by the hair and tossed him too. Akai cried out in pain as he was tossed in such a painful way. "These two were sneaking up on us with bows, barely dodged their shot," he said as the one with the rope worked to tie up both Akai and Ray. The original one that caught them wrestling them down, overpowering both of them. The blonde bandit leader, Kel, looked at both Ray then Akai with wrathful disdain. He let go of Lacey's face and approached them. Ray struggled against his bindings before a boot slammed into Ray's chest, knocking him over. Kel said, "Check the boy for weapons," as he kicked Ray's side as he lay on the ground. Ray groaned in pain as Kel kicked again. "You think you can just waltz up on us, bastard?" He grabbed the knife out of Ray's bound hand that Akai's father had been attempting to cut himself free with. He threw it to the wayside and said, "Stand him up." Akai had bandits check over him, pulling the knife off his belt and everything out of his pockets, including the quiver he still had. He was made to sit up and watched as the bandits stood up his father. Kel said, "Peasants like you always think they're tough. It's time you learn a lesson in humility," before driving his fist into Ray's stomach. The bandits held him as Ray cursed back, but was interrupted with another punch to the stomach, making him double over. Ray would have fell if he didn't have two men holding him in place. "Stop it!" Akai yelled, almost in sync with Emmy, who was glaring. Jennifer was worried, but she was scared of what would happen if she tried to intervene. Lamoury was shaking in place in fear. She heard the horror stories of what these men did to Lacey and feared she'd face the same. Lacey herself, she was paralyzed. She didn't dare take a step or make a sound. She had been victim to this man for so long that now that she was facing him again, she felt powerless. Lacey would, by a modern medical professional, be diagnosed with PTSD. The bandits behind the three bound women jostled Emmy before striking her and told her to shut it, then took cloth and gagged her with it. Akai yelled again, "Stop it, don't hurt my father," as he tried to rise to his feet. Burning heat welling up in his chest as Akai felt exceptionally angry at the sight of his father being beaten. Kel had a disgusting smirk on his face as he drove another powerful uppercut into his father's stomach. Everyone knew from Lacey that Kel was an awakened sorcerer. Even though he was a sorcerer, all who had their powers awakened by the gods have exceptional strength. Ray was left wheezing as they let go of Ray, letting him fall to the ground. "Ray," Jennifer muttered before she noticed Akai getting to his feet. She said, "Akai, don't." But her son didn't listen. He had a hateful look in his eyes as he stared at Kel. The bandit leader looked at the 10-year-old and laughed. "See this, Lacey? See what you've done? I told you this would happen if you ran away." Kel approached Akai and kicked him in the stomach, sending Akai falling back onto the ground. Kel said, "I promised you that whoever you tried to hide behind would only suffer because of you. Look at this well, Lacey. This is your fault," he said with venom in his voice. Akai rose to sit before the man's boot, came down upon him again. Akai yelled as he was knocked down again, then Kel stomped down. Driving his heel into Akai's ribs, Akai refused to yell in pain until he felt his ribs crack under the pressure. The sharp pain was too bad for just a boy to handle, and Akai began screaming as he writhed on the ground. "For the love of the gods, stop it. He's just a kid," Jennifer yelled, unable to stay silent. She looked at Akai, tears welling up in her eyes as Lacey's face only showed terrible regret and sorrow. Kel turned to face Jennifer and spat, "The brat's mother," before he took a step away from Akai. Akai writhed in pain, but he heard what Kel said. The heat in his chest was horrible now, feeling like his insides were burning as he tried and failed to sit up, struggling on the ground. "Of course the boy doesn't know how to respect his elders. Just look at you," Kel said in disgust. As he approached Akai's mother, the kid forced out a pained, "Don't you dare," as he sat on his knees despite the broken ribs. A bandit approached, and Kel stopped to look back, seeing the bandit draw a short falchion and hold it out towards Akai. "The boy does have spirit. Maybe we'll take him with us too after we kill his disgusting parents." "No," Lacey suddenly managed to shout, but her voice seemed to put a deeper scowl on Kel's face. Akai began struggling to break from his bindings as it became hard to think with the fire burning in his chest. He felt too hot and stopped caring about his own pain. Kel began to draw his own sword as he stood over Jennifer. Ray began trying to sit up as well, but a bandit put a boot on his back to hold him down. "Please, you don't have to hurt them. I'm sorry, I'll come back with you." Lacey cried as the bandit handling Akai put the sword to his neck, then had to physically hold him down as Akai ignored it and began trying to stand again. As Kel raised his sword, Akai felt his hatred and anger give way to the burning need to protect his family. He heard a voice in his head briefly. Then Akai felt something within himself give, no longer containing the torrent of heat within his chest. "Gods damn it, this kid won't stop," said the bandit, trying and failing to keep Akai pushed to his knees. The boy rose to his feet as the air began to grow hotter around him. This caught Kel's attention as he turned to look. Suddenly, all the fire within the village was extinguished. The roof of his family home and of the rest of the village completely stopped burning or smoldering. Even the smoke had stopped. The bandit, pushing down on Akai's shoulder, pulled his hand away and cursed, the hand blistering as if touching red-hot iron. Kel's eyes widened as he saw golden fire ignite behind Akai's eyes and quickly conjured a magical shield around him. "I said stop," Akai roared as the ropes binding his hands and feet ignited and burned away. Orange flame rising around and swirling in a vortex around Akai. The bandit with a burned hand took a step back, raising his sword to try and kill this kid. Unfortunately for the bandit, Akai's fire was changing. The vortex of fire changed to a vibrant, bright golden yellow and intensified into a horrific inferno, catching the bandit in it, who didn't even have the time to scream as they were enveloped with Akai. Next, it exploded out and burned away the ropes binding his family, miraculously not hurting them. However, it did char the skin and clothes of the bandits except for Kel, causing them to cry in pain and blinding them. The bandit behind Akai was gone. The only sign they were there was ashes caught in the wind and glowing white hot metal slag pooled on the dirt. Kel raised his sword into a guard behind his arcane shield as Akai lowered himself some, then launching forwards far faster than any human had a right to, leaving a streak of bright yellow fire behind him as his fist crashed into the arcane shield, shattering it. Kel was shocked and only just began moving to strike with his sword, but it was far too slow. Akai, enveloped with an aura of yellow fire with the same bright fire shining through his eyes, dug a foot into the ground and pivoted on it. A backspin kick landing his heel on Kel's hands, crunching the bones and sending the sword flying and burying into the wooden wall of the shed. A heartbeat later, Akai planted his other foot in the dirt and continued the momentum. His torso twisted and fist shot forwards, trailed with bright fire. His fist buried into Kel's stomach deeper than should have been normally possible. Then an explosion of yellow flame engulfed them both. Kel was launched back, barely avoiding the house as he shot back. Around 50 years in, he was rolling on the ground like a rag doll, only stopping well beyond 100 yards because his body hit a tree. It has only been 3 seconds now since the fire dispersed and Akai struck Kel. While his body was still launched back, more yellow fire enveloped Akai before shooting into the air in large plumes. In the sky, it coalesced into bolts that shot outwards, targeting the bandits, forming into a vague shape of a bird before striking both the bandits around his family and most of the bandits deeper in the village, battling the militia. His family saw these bolts of fire burn through the bandits, leaving smoldering fist-sized holes through their chests. After a grand total of 12 seconds since Akai erupted into fire, it began to lose its yellow shine, returning to mundane orange fire enveloping him before extinguishing. Akai fell to the ground unconscious. Chapter 4, Blessed Smith. The last thing Akai remembered was yelling, "Stop it," then hearing someone speak to him, though he did not fully remember what was said. The silver-haired boy sat up in his bed, looking around in a panic. He threw the blanket off of him and noticed he was covered in bandages. His skin hurt all over, and looking underneath, his torso was pink and raw as if he was burned. He didn't take the time to dress himself. Wearing only a pair of pants, he quickly ran out and ran downstairs. "Mom, Dad, everyone," he shouted before stopping halfway down the stairs to see everyone, including Lamoury's father Drake, and even Kid and his parents were there too. Everyone was, "All right, Akai, you're awake," Jennifer shouted before running up to catch him in a warm hug, holding her son close. The hug was tight enough to hurt, but Akai only returned it. Everyone stopped what they were doing to look, and Ray shouted, "Easy, Jennifer. Don't squeeze him too hard." Jennifer lightened up on the hug, but brought Akai down and had him sit with everyone. He looked and was surprised to see everyone was okay, even noticing Emmy barely had a bruise on her cheek from where she was smacked. Akai asked, "Everyone is okay?" worriedly. Lamoury walked up and shouted at Akai, "Are we okay? We should be asking if you are, idiot," before grabbing his shoulders. Though Akai expected to be shaken while being yelled at by Lamoury, she only held him gently. "You were asleep for a week. What the hell was that anyways you did?" This info clearly shocked Akai. His eyes widened and he looked at everyone. He didn't answer for nearly a minute before quietly asking, "It's been a week?" Lamoury's father, Drake, asked, "What was the last thing you remember, kid?" Akai took a moment to think before saying, "I remember that blonde guy about to hurt Mom. It felt like my heart was being boiled inside my chest. Then I heard someone say something, and then everything got really bright and I woke up in bed." "What did you hear being said?" Kid's father quickly asked, as if Akai's answer was very important. Akai flinched at the sudden question. He had to take a moment to think and remember. Suddenly he said, "Righteous fury smolders in your heart. I'll help it ignite." All of the adults' eyes widened, and they stared at Akai in a mix of awe and happy surprise. "Do you know what this means, boy?" asked Liam, Kid's father. "No, I have no clue what it meant." Akai answered honestly as he shook his head. "It means the gods had recognized you and had blessed you with an awakening." Akai looked a bit confused, and Liam continued to explain. "Most people are completely mundane, like me, your father, and everyone else here. But there are the lucky few who do something that gains the attention of one of the gods. When they recognize you and what you've done, or your case, what you are going to do, you are imprinted with the tiniest portion of the god's own power, awakening your spirit to all sorts of stuff. Some people study magic to get the blessing of Andata, and thus can cast magic. Other people train to get strong or work hard so they can be blessed by Miog and gain strength. It sounds to me like you may have been blessed by Svendar, whose primary attribute is wrath. You turn your anger into fire and power." Akai listened and his eyes slowly lit up as the concept was explained to him. Soon a smile was beaming on his face and he lifted both arms up, shouting, "I was blessed by a god," before wincing and holding his side. Lamoury patted his shoulders and said, "Careful, Akai. You have a few broken ribs, so take it easy." Jennifer helped Akai stand up and said, "Let's get you back to bed, sweetie. You are hurt and need rest." When the two began to walk, a noticeably more timid Lacey, who was alone in the kitchen, spoke up. She was still rattled over what happened. "Thank you," she said, glancing at Akai before looking away. The boy smiled and put a hand over his chest in a salute. He winced at the discomfort the movement caused. This did elicit a small smile on the shaken girl's face. Over the next few weeks, Akai's mother hardly let him do anything other than rest, walk around the house, and eat. Akai learned the full extent of the injuries he suffered in this time, and more about what happened to the village and the bandits. Akai was surprised to hear that he had 3 broken ribs and a few more bruised ones. His chest had suffered fairly bad burns. Confusingly, the burns seemed to come from inside and radiate out, not the other way around. Most of the bandits in the village were killed with holes burned through them. Only a handful on the south side of the village survived. The bandit that had been holding Akai was reduced to ash, and Kel had not lived more than a minute after Akai's devastating magical fire-fueled punch. Kel had most of his internal organs, including both lungs, ruptured. Half of his ribs were broken, and so was his back. He died from internal bleeding, but even if he had lived, he would have been paralyzed from the mid-back down. Akai didn't know how to feel about actually killing so many people. There were many complex emotions, but eventually he resolved that whatever they were going to do with his family and Lacey, this was the better ending. 2 months later, Akai was in the training grounds with the militia, Kid standing next to him, both doing sword drills. Though Kid still held a wooden sword, Akai was given a heavier metal training sword. Since he gained his awakened blessing, Akai was growing stronger faster than expected. His muscles didn't grow in size, but they were visibly getting more and more taut under his skin, growing denser and more defined. 75, 76, 77. Both him and Kid and a few other teens and young adults called out in unison. Sweat dripping from their brows as they swung the training swords, focused on strengthening their cutting form and making it muscle memory. When everyone finally reached 100, they were done. They had just finished the full morning's workout. 100 swings, running laps around the grounds, push-ups, sit-ups, then 100 more swings at the end. Akai and Kid are both visibly exhausted as they put up their training swords. "Hey Akai, mind if I come with you to visit your girlfriend?" Kid asked. Akai rolled his eyes. He was used to the teasing by now and said, "She's not my girlfriend, but sure." Akai and Kid walked, Kid letting his arms hang low due to how fatigued they are. When they reached the smithy, Lamoury's father shouted, "Boy, come here and put that special fire of yours to use." As he saw Drake working the bellows for their forge, Lamoury was holding a piece of metal with tongs, heating it in the fire. Kid went to sit in a chair as Akai walked to the forge. He held out both of his hands and closed his eyes. Focusing on the ember he felt burning in his heart. Soon the fire of the forge changed from orange flames burning from cherry-red coals to a yellow flame and the coals burning brighter and hotter. Akai struggled to hold control over the fire, changing it to the same kind burning within him. Kid watched as Lamoury worked to evenly heat the metal before saying, "That's enough," letting Akai drop his concentration as Lamoury brings the glowing metal to the anvil. Lamoury's work in the smithy has made her muscles grow larger than Akai's or Kid's. She lifted the hammer and her arm was visibly thicker than theirs. Lamoury struck the hammer against the metal with incredible strength, yet equally great precision. Ting, 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 ting. They watched as Lamoury was forging a heavy construction maul, shaping the head and seeing the intense focus in her eyes. Akai felt a strange warmth in his chest as he watched, hammer striking glowing metal. Lamoury's father stood back and supervised, but had a curious look on his face. Ting, 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 ting. The last strike was suddenly much stronger than before, yet supremely precise. Looking at Lamoury's face, she seemed almost like she was in a trance as she struck the iron with more force than before. The metal deformed under the hammer like it was made of clay, yet shaping perfectly into what it needed to be. Another strike hit with inhuman force. The hammer Lamoury held had its handle creak and a couple of splinters fell, leaving behind a crack in the tough hardwood. Akai felt a slight burn in his chest as he saw green energy spiral from Lamoury's moving arm and coated the smithing hammer's head. Then the final strike coated the half-formed head of the maul. A faint glow of the same color briefly appeared behind Lamoury's eyes as the energy pulled and pushed the iron like it was an amorphous liquid, then dissipating, leaving a fully formed head of a maul on the anvil. After this miracle, Lamoury had a faint green glow behind her hazel eyes begin to slowly dim, before another wave of this green energy spread through her body. She relaxed as it sunk into her skin, leaving it looking just as smooth as before. However, her muscles seemed to be just a hair more defined than before. Everyone who looked at her right now knew the has been blessed by the god Mio, god of strength, patron of laborers and artisans. Lamoury took a few breaths before nearly falling, being caught by her father who stood behind her. Unlike Akai, who had fallen unconscious, Lamoury stayed awake, showing signs of mental exhaustion. Immediately Drake asked, "What did you hear?" as he lowered himself to his daughter's eye level. The slightly dazed Lamoury said, "I heard someone tell me to strive for greatness. They said I should take their power and have it flow through me like water, to push and pull whatever I desire into form, to weather and destroy obstacles, and to nourish my growth like a field of grain." Lamoury rubbed her eyes as the last wisps of the green energy left her, but she looked at the anvil in a bit of surprise. She looked at the time and asked, "Did I? That wasn't a dream, was it?" As lucidity began to come back to her, the brightest smile could be seen on Drake's face as he grabbed and hugged his daughter. He laughed and said, "My daughter has been blessed. This is such a wonderful day." The shouting grabbed the attention of Lamoury's mother, who had missed the ordeal. For the next few hours, Akai and Kid were left celebrating with Lamoury's family, and news quickly spread through the village. Many people came to stop by and congratulated Lamoury. The whole time she seemed very tired but did not want to go to bed. She did display an aspect of her awakening during this time. Lamoury discovered her strength had increased greatly. She was carrying a box of stuff and realized it didn't seem to weigh nearly as much as she remembered, yet it was full of various tools and equipment for the smithy. She tested it further and found that she could ever so barely lift the anvil by herself now, even with it mounted to the wooden base, putting her strength just below her own father's right now. The anvil weighed around 200 pounds with the base. By the time the brief celebration was over, Lamoury's mother was going to plan a proper celebration for her daughter with the rest of the village. She considered making it a holiday since two people awakened so close together. Lamoury was lying in the grass as Akai and Kid was sitting next to her. Lamoury sighed and said, "I understand why you were asleep for so long, Akai. I am so exhausted, and I didn't do anything cool like you did either." "Nothing cool? Did you not see what you did?" Akai shouted. "No, all I did was make the head of a maul. I didn't single-handedly beat a bunch of bandits and extinguish all the fires," Lamoury said with closed eyes, though she could imagine the look on his face. "Hey," Kid said, seeming frustrated. But before Akai could ask what was going on, he grabbed the silver-haired boy's shirt and pulled him along to the training field. He said, "First you awaken, then the day you go to visit Lamoury she awakens. You're going to spar with me until whatever you're doing makes me awaken too." Akai had a dumbfounded look on his face and said, "What? I'm not doing anything. What are you on about?" as Kid was still pulling him by his shirt. Minutes later, Akai stood across from Kid, both wielding training swords and shields, both wearing simple helmets, and the instructor made them put on padded jackets. "Are you sure about this?" Akai said. "You know that I got a lot strong." "I know that," Kid shouted. It was obvious both his friends had awakened so close to one another. Kid did not want to be the one left out. A fire burned in his eyes as he suddenly lunged forwards. The sound of wood striking wood rang out until Akai stood, breathing a little hard, but in front of him Kid was on his knees, only keeping himself from laying flat on the dirt by supporting himself with the wooden sword. Kid was dripping in sweat as he gasped for air. Akai had managed to parry every incoming attack and tried to refrain from hitting back, not wanting to hurt his friend. Awakening had increased not only Akai's strength, but his speed, reaction time, and clarity of mind. So Kid was not able to land hits anymore. Kid tightened the grip on his training sword and said, "We're going to keep sparring every day until I awaken. I don't care how long it takes." Feeling a bit bad, Akai nodded. He said, "I will help you." Over the next week, Akai and Kid could be seen at the training grounds almost all day sparring. When the sound of wood against wood wasn't heard, Kid was resting to get ready for their next spar. He fought until he couldn't stand, took half an hour to recover, and kept going. Akai was about to speak up on the seventh day of this routine. It was dusk, the sun setting in the distance. The shield long grew too heavy for Kid. He was only a boy around Akai's age. Such physical exertion had been taking its toll on his body. So they stood, only wielding wooden swords as Kid lunged forwards for another round. Kid started with a stab, which Akai bat out of the way. Kid followed through with the movement, turning the parried strike into an upwards draw. Akai stepped back, letting Kid bring it down. Akai blocked it with the guard on his sword, then moved in to strike Kid while keeping his sword in the bind and unable to parry it. Curiously, Akai felt a familiar warmth in his chest as Kid stepped to the outside, disengaging for a moment. Kid went in for another upwards cut, but as Akai moved to dodge it, Kid pulled the sword back while straightening his wrist, causing Akai's parry to miss. Despite having quicker reaction times, Akai fell for the feint. Kid shifted seamlessly into a thrust. Akai barely managed to shift in time to block it, but the moment he made contact to bat away Kid's thrust, Kid took the momentum to swing the sword in an arc at Akai's legs. Akai was forced to disengage, and he felt heat rising in his chest. Looking forwards, he saw the fire of passion in Kid's eyes mixed with almost perfect focus. Kid moved in again. He wasn't any quicker than before. He was a lot slower than when they began training much earlier, but his skill had sharpened suddenly. Akai's superior speed and reaction times didn't seem to matter anymore. Every attack Akai threw, Kid parried. Every attack Kid threw, he pushed Akai's ability to parry in response. Kid countered just as easily, and feints Akai could see a mile away just an hour ago were nearly undetectable until the moment they struck. After a minute, Kid was in perfect position. He managed to stop Akai's swing and catch his sword in the bind at an off angle. Kid pushed forwards with all his speed and might, having the strong in his favor. He was going to finally get a hit in on Akai, or he would have. At the last moment, Kid's knees buckled, void of any strength left, and his thrust turned into a fumble as he fell to the dirt. Kid lay panting heavily, having pushed his body too far. His vision had gone blurry, and sound began to turn into echoes. He felt it, though. He was almost there. His performance had something's attention, but he collapsed before it could focus in on him. It left just as fast at the end. As Akai lowered himself to try and help his friend, he heard through Kid's panting, "It was right there. I almost did it." Akai helped roll Kid onto his side. Through his auburn hair, Kid's red eyes shined up at Akai's own blue ones. He took a deep breath and said with conviction, "Tomorrow. I will awaken tomorrow." Kid was too tired to argue when Akai picked him up. He had been pushing himself too hard all day. His legs just couldn't take it anymore. Akai said, "No, you're resting tomorrow. Stay at home. Let your body heal. We will spar the day after." Akai carried Kid to his home and ended up giving his mother quite a fright. Kid's mother knew her son was training hard, but seeing him covered in dirt and unable to stand, she took him in without pause. Kid wasn't able to spar the day after his rest day, both because every muscle in his body was beyond sore, and because his mother had punished him for taking it too far. He wasn't allowed to leave the house for another week after this. Chapter 5, Sword Saint. Akai was no longer working for the sawmill anymore. Drake had hired him to work in the forge with his daughter. Together, they increased the quality of what the forge can make drastically. Akai has grown more competent in controlling the fire in the forge. Lamori discovered her affinity is with water and can quench and temper metal using this innate magic much better than before. Drake mostly supervised and let the two kids do the work themselves. He still guides and helps where needed. He felt immeasurable pride when watching his daughter work. Lamori hadn't been able to recreate the same feat she did before, however metal seems much more willing to change its shape when she was the one working on it, instead of her father. Over this week, Lamoury's physical strength had been slowly but steadily growing. She was now a good deal stronger than her own father, despite being many times smaller than him. As Drake was sitting and wondering at just how strong Lamoury would become when she's older, the door to the forge swung open, which was completely unnecessary because of the open shop front right next to it, bright sunlight shining through in the clear morning. A week had passed and Kid was finally done being punished by his parents. He glared at his two friends before pointing at them. "Both of you, training field, now." Akai and Lamoury looked at each other in confusion for a moment before Drake gave them a pat on the back. He said, "Go ahead," and Lamoury smiled. She was the first one out, and Kid was already jogging down the road to the training field. Lamoury and Akai looked at him before Lamoury said, "Geez, he seemed really intense." "Yeah, he's taking this way too seriously," Akai said as they decided to walk at a leisurely pace instead of keeping up with Kid. By the time they arrived, Kid was standing in the field and tossed Akai a training sword. Lamoury didn't ask for one because she didn't really care for the whole sword fighting thing. Lamoury walked off to the side and leaned against a fence at the edge of the field as Akai and Kid took a stance. Akai felt the strange heat in his chest again as Kid's foot slowly slid in the dirt. Then he lunged forwards with an attack. Lamoury squinted as the sound of wooden swords clacking together. Akai moving as fast as a blur, but despite being so fast, Kid saw right through his movements. Parrying each strike and barely missing his riposts, a sweat drop beaded on Akai's forehead as he was actually being stressed by Kid. Akai felt like he may regret this, but he wanted to learn just how much his friend has improved. Akai's eyes sharpened as wisps of flame began to form in the air around his feet and hands. Then, with much greater speed and force, before Akai parried Kid's sword and tried to sweep it for a disarm. However, a strange burning sensation filled Akai's chest again. Like before, a passion burned in Kid's eyes. He managed to step back and pull away, disengaging in time to avoid being disarmed. Akai steadied himself and swung down with enough force to blow through any guard Kid would put up. Kid, however, did not try to block. He intercepted Akai's swing with his own, just enough to divert the strike as his leg rose into a kick. Landing on Akai's side with enough force to make him stumble, Akai took a step back to steady himself. He tried to push the flames around him more to increase his strength, but by the time he tried to focus on that, Kid was moving in again. No matter how much Akai tried to use his new power to gain the advantage, Kid continued to push him more and more. Finally, Akai made a mistake and pushed his power too far. Flame swirled around him as he empowered himself as much as he could. His chest burned as he swung his sword full force. It wasn't until it was about to connect, Akai realized his mistake. If his sword hit, Kid would be lucky to live with broken bones. In the last moment, however, the burning in Akai's chest grew more and Lamoury even felt a pain fill her own body for a moment. The skies, clear and blue, somehow had a bolt of lightning fall from the heavens that struck Kid. The electric energy did not hurt Kid, however. Instead, it sparked around his body as his eyes glow a faint light blue behind his normally red iris. With speed that completely eclipsed what Akai was capable of, Kid swung his own sword, and it sent Akai's flying upwards broken in two pieces. In the same fluid motion, Kid stepped forwards and thrusted, the wooden sword brushing past Akai's head, intentionally missing. Akai's eyes widened and the flames dispersed instantly. However, Kid stood there, electricity crackling around him for a moment before it slowly lightened up and stopped. Kid then stood up straight and had a smirk on his face as Akai and Lamoury, as well as the half-dozen other villagers training for the militia, stared in shock. "I told you it would happen," Kid said as the pieces of Akai's wooden sword finally landed on the ground. "Now let's go. I want to tell my father." Lamoury leaned off the fence and said, "Hang on, I want to have a turn," as she felt the urge to give this a shot. Kid blinked as Lamoury walked up to them. Akai sighed and said, "Let me get you a training weapon." "Some kind of hammer, please," Lamoury called out as Kid felt very awkward about this. He rubbed the back of his head. "Are you sure about this, Lamoury?" "Of course I am," she sighed, rolling her shoulders as she began to stretch a little. "Well, you don't really practice this sort of thing." Lamoury rolled her eyes and held out her hand as Akai walked back. He had a simple wooden version of a war hammer. He tossed it and she caught it easily. Twirling it a little, she tried to take a stance, though it looked fairly weird. Kid raised his sword and looked at Lamori as he saw a green energy begin gently flowing around her arms. He narrowed his eyes before Lamori ran forwards. The dirt compressed under her boot as she launched forwards with extreme speed. Electricity cracked around Kid as it barely gave him enough time to raise his sword to parry. Lamori's war hammer shot up, but she dug her heel into the ground, bringing herself to a stop just behind Kid. She then swung it down, and Kid moved as fast as the lightning that struck him a moment ago. But it wasn't much use. Lamori's wooden hammer crashed right through, breaking Kid's wooden sword before stopping less than an inch from his head. She then gently tapped it against his head and said, "Boop, I win," before Kid fell to his knees. Genuine fear in his eyes still lingering as Lamori smiled and twirled the wooden weapon, walking to put it back. "She's too strong," he muttered. Many minutes later, Kid composed himself and walked into his parents' house with Akai and Lamori in tow. Before Kid could say anything, a shoe went flying over his head. Next thing he knew, his mother was shouting, "I told you to stay away from that training field." As she walked from inside the house, her face flushed with anger. His father followed behind, not saying anything. He was smart enough to know not to butt in when she gets like this. Kid thought of an amusing way to let his parents know what happened. So he took a step forward. Just as his foot landed on the floor, electricity crackled around his leg. Suddenly, with a flash, Kid was 30 feet and across the room, embracing his mother in a hug. She stood, shocked, as Akai and Lamori poked their heads in from the doorway, seeing Kid's mother looking a mix of angry, horrified, and stunned. His father looked more shocked than anything. Then Christy wrapped her arms around Kid as his father broke into a boisterous laugh. He put an arm around Christy and a hand on Kid's shoulder. Liam said, "Moving here was the best thing to happen to us. Our boy had been blessed with an awakening." But Christy didn't seem super happy. She wrapped her arms tighter around Kid and she muttered, "You stupid boy, why did you keep training?" on the verge of tears. Seeing this, Akai and Lamori walked in a bit concerned. "Christy, it'll be fine. He's my son after all," Liam said, rubbing his wife's back as he toned down his excitement. "That's exactly why I'm scared, Liam." "What's wrong?" Lamori couldn't help but ask, confused why Christy was upset about Kid awakening. "It's Liam, you tell her," Christy said with a sigh as Kid began to look worried about making his mother upset. "I wasn't going to tell you to until you were a bit older, but I guess now is as good of a time as any," Liam said, more firmly holding Kid's shoulder. "You are awakened and citizens of this kingdom, Lagonia. It's mandated by the king that anyone who awakens must join the army for a time. Conscription is mandatory. But don't worry too much, the minimum age you have to be is 14, so you all have 4 more years." Kid, Akai, and Lamori looked startled by the news. They'll be made to join the army. Akai didn't seem to mind, but Lamori frowned, not wanting this at all. "You'll go to an academy to start off, so don't feel like they'll just drop you in the middle of a battle," Liam said, holding Christy and Kid close. "An academy?" Akai asked with a contemplative look on his face. "Yeah, an academy. They have retired folks and even hire some sorcerers to teach the awakened. A lot would be around 14 to 18 years old, but don't be surprised if you see some middle-aged people as students. Most people don't awaken as young as you 3 did." Lamori frowned and Akai rubbed the back of his head. He sighed and said, "So we have 4 years together before we gotta leave the village. Then we'll be gone for a while after that." Christy said, "Yes, that's why. I didn't want you to train so hard, Kid. I didn't want you to be a soldier. Because every day you're not here, I'm going to be scared to hear you'll never be coming back." Liam patted their shoulders and spoke up. "That's enough of a somber mood. This is still an amazing thing to happen, Christy. Kid is strong, just like me. I know he'll do well. I'll help prepare them before they head off, but let's get that festival planned. We have another person to add to make it a holiday." Chapter 6, Greylock. Akai was up before sunrise, putting boots on, dressed in hunting leathers. Across from him was his father Ray doing the same, and Kid who was joining them. Ray promised to get plenty of meat for the festival being held in 2 days now. With Akai's and Kid's new strength, they said they can pull a sled with what they catch together. Though that wasn't going to be necessary. After getting dressed and their bows ready, Ray opened the front door to see Lamoury standing with her hands on her hips. "Since when did you think you could go out and do something fun without me?" Ray laughed and rubbed the back of his head and said, "Well, I was thinking you would be helping some of the others get things ready in the village. You know your strength would be a massive boon for everyone there." Lamoury slumped and said, "It's so boring. They'll just have me carrying heavy stuff all day or trying to make me help make the food. So I decided I will be coming with you three." "Do you have a bow too, Lamoury?" Akai asked from the back as he was tying a quiver to his belt. "Of course I don't, but why would I need one?" "I can just punch," she said, holding up a fist. "Yeah, good luck with that. Animals would run away before you even see them," Kid said with a chuckle. Lamoury glared and said, "I can see one thing I can punch," which made Kid's face pale a bit before he said sorry, under his breath. Ray clapped his hands and gathered the three kids' attention. He said, "All right, Lamoury, you can come with us, but just stay back a bit. If you see something, let us know. Then we can all work together to bring back what we catch. But let's start heading out before the sun rises." Soon the four were off, heading into the woods north of the village, walking in the direction of the mountains. Akai kept a keen eye, as did Kid. Lamoury was mostly focused on walking quietly after being scolded a few times for stomping through the woods. The sun was starting to rise, and the sky began to gain some color when Lamoury saw a deer off to the side. She walked up to Ray and tugged on his shirt before pointing, not wanting to scare it away by talking. They all stopped and turned to look, seeing a deer. It was a buck, but a fairly small and skinny one. It was just losing the spots in its fur, so Ray shook his head and whispered, "That one's just a babe. We'll let it go and grow some. It ought to be good come the winter hunt." Lamoury felt a little dejected as they continued to trudge through the forest. Traveling deeper and into where it is more unkempt, nobody else comes this far out to maintain the land. Over the next couple of hours, they spotted a few other animals. Kid saw a few cabers, and they managed to bag 3 of them. Lamoury surprised everyone by throwing a rock to get one after Akai missed his first shot. Since they were going to be spending the day hunting, Ray bled the carcasses before putting them on a wooden sled, letting the kids take turns pulling it. Come noon, they had an okay haul. It wasn't as impressive as expected, but for the past couple of hours they hadn't seen anything, which was weird. Currently, Akai was pulling the sled, which had the cabers, a few grouse, and even a comically massive rat that tried to attack Kid when he found its hidey hole in a hollow tree. It was almost as big as he was. Ray stopped and said, "Listen," as the others stopped to do just that. They kept their eyes open and listened closely and didn't hear anything. Confused, Kid said, "I don't hear anything, Mr. Ryneveld." "Exactly," he said, "there's nothing. No birds, no animal calls. It's silent." Ray put a hand on the string of his bow and said, "Let's head back. Something is wrong here." Nodding, Kid put a hand on the short sword he brought with him, and Lamoury grabbed one of the 2 ropes Akai held, working together to drag the sled. But as they turned to run, they heard rustling in the bushes. Ray backed up and knocked an arrow before they saw something completely unexpected come out of the thick underbrush. A large monster standing on what looked like 2 small hind legs and 2 strong muscled arms ending in black claws. It was covered in dirt and a grey stone-like fur. Black onyx eyes stared at them as it bared sharp teeth and swished an incredibly powerful thick tail. "Run!" Ray yelled, but as he turned they saw this monster wasn't alone. Cutting off the path they came on was another one of these beasts. These beasts, known as greylogs, usually lived in the mountains where the ground was more rock than dirt. They shouldn't be down in the forest, and because of that, it had Ray terrified. Normally, it would take an entire squad of seasoned warriors to be able to take down a single greylock. 2 was just absurd for them to face. "Kids, drop the sled and just run. I don't think even you can," Ray said quietly as he tried to back away. But his talking was interrupted by the greylock that had been following them lunging forwards. Akai and Lamoury both planted their feet and threw out rising uppercuts. A loud crack was heard as the greylock that lunged was knocked a few feet into the air. Ray sighed and realized this was inevitable. He just hoped they could run away before getting too hurt. Ray drew his bow and shot the arrow at the Greylock that first appeared. Though to his dismay, the arrow merely bounced off of its stone-like hide. It locked its eyes on him and began to move, but before it could get any speed, Kid was already in front of it, his eyes glowing a dim blue as electricity crackled in the air around him. With speed, he drew the steel shortsword and cut. The blade barely able to scratch the thick hide, but it cut enough to cause a thin line of red to begin coloring its grey fur. In front of Akai and Lamori, the Greylock halted its backwards momentum with its powerful tail. Then as it landed, it reared its head down with terrifying force. Akai crossed his arms and braced himself, flames starting to swirl around him. But this beast hit even harder than Lamori could. Akai did not remain standing, he fell down onto his knees and sunk a few inches into the dirt. His arms were left red from the impact as he grimaced in pain. Across the way, Kid and Ray were left to fend against the other. Kid nimbly dodged each swipe of the monster's claws, avoided its bites, and either ducked or jumped over its tail when it swung it around. However, they couldn't do much damage to the beast either. Kid kept its attention, but Ray's arrows either bounced off or stuck for just a second before falling out. Kid was able to cut it, but his cuts were shallow and only made the thing mad. Lamori punched the Greylock again, making it stagger for just a moment, interrupting its attempt to bite Akai after knocking him to his knees. He felt his whole body protest when he tried to get back up. The impact made his arms ache and his knees feel weak. He realized these things were stronger than expected, something they should have ran from when they could. He scowled as he saw Lamori brace herself as it turned and hit her with its powerful tail, sending her sliding back a dozen feet, leaving ruts in the forest floor where her feet dug in. Steeling himself, Akai gritted his teeth and tried to call on more of his nascent power. Orange incandescent fire began to form and swirl around his body, air beginning to warm around him because of it. He pushed the warmth he felt into his muscles as the Greylock began charging at him, raising its front leg to swipe black claws at him. He moved in first, ducking under its head and trying to land as firm of a punch as he could on its chest. His fist hit, and he felt pain shoot up his arm. He had never hit anything so tough so hard before. The skin on one of his knuckles split, but it was not broken. The Greylock, however, had the wind knocked out of it. Akai heard it gasp as it took a step back. He paled, though. The thing was gazing at him with hate in its onyx eyes. Thankfully, Lamori was coming back. Before it was fully recovered, she was by Akai's side. Energy that looked like green water swirled around her arm as she threw a straight punch at the monster's face. The ground shook, and a shockwave rippled out from the impact of Lamori's empowered hit. Her strength is far superior naturally. However, she made a mistake. She didn't strengthen her legs with her nascent power, nor take a solid stance the way Akai had. So while the Greylock was sent backwards a few feet, she had sent herself flying back into a tree. "Lamori!" he shouted as she smacked into a tree and fell to the ground, trembling. "Ow, ow, ow," she was muttering, trying to get back up. Akai looked over, and Kid and Ray were handling things easier. The Greylock they were fighting was getting covered in cuts as it couldn't touch Kid, and Akai saw as it went in for a bite, Ray's loosed arrow intercepted it, digging deep into the much softer flesh inside of the monster's mouth, leaving only the fletchings sticking out as it made cries of anger and pain. Akai turned to face the one that was focusing on himself and Lamori. It let out a roar that sounded closer to a landslide as its hind legs kicked off and its much large forelegs dug into the ground, pulling it in a charge. Akai sidestepped, ducking under a swipe from its claws before grabbing onto its fur. The fire he had encircling him moved under his will, flowing into its side and burning it as he tried to keep it from going straight to hit Lamori instead. Akai failed, of course. This thing was as heavy as a boulder its size would be and had a lot of inertia. But with Lamori getting up, she was ready for it this time. Green energy coalesced around her whole body as she braced against the trunk of the tree. When the Greylock made impact, she pushed herself forwards with all the might she could muster, stopping it entirely as another shockwave released from their impact. Akai was forced to let go of its side and shuddered as he saw Lamori holding its front legs, denying it the ability to swipe at her. and ducked under its head so it could not bite her. Her feet sunk into a mass of roots as the tree was now tilted a little from the forces exerted on it. More energy flowed through her as she began trying to push it back. Its hind legs dug into the dirt, resisting her. Akai didn't want to give it time to get an opening to hurt his friend, so he began trying to manifest more of his awakened power. He remembered the feeling he had as he first awakened. Before he blacked out, he felt so much heat burning inside of his chest, it felt like it could have melted steel. And from what his mother said happened, he technically did. The fire around Akai began to swirl faster, and he tried to make more. He felt the faintest ember ignite in his chest. When he felt ready, Akai charged forwards and took a solid stance. He willed his flames to follow his moving fist, and when it struck the side of the greylock, scorching fire flowed over it, leaving black-burned hairs where grey fur was, and sending it falling over onto its side as Lamoury wrestled it. Akai felt pain radiate through his whole body after the impact. The ember in his chest extinguished, and only pain was left in its place. Lamoury wrestled the greylock to the ground and was doing her best to not let its teeth or claws touch her. She yelled through gritted teeth, "What are you doing? Keep hitting it." Akai tried to throw away the pain he felt and called on his awakened power again, swirling orange flames reappearing around him as he moved in to try and subdue the monster. But this time, when he got close, its tail came around and smashed down on Akai. He yelped as he was pushed into the dirt, feeling like he was just struck in the back with a sledgehammer. He gasped and tried to get back on his feet, but the tail struck him again. Akai's vision became blurry due to the second hit hitting his head. Lamoury gritted her teeth, and more green energy wrapped around her body. She began digging her feet into the dirt as she fought the greylock's attempt to right itself. But suddenly, she felt herself being lifted off the ground. The greylock managed to get a foot under itself and was now pushing itself to stand on its hind legs. Before Lamoury could tell what was going on, she felt like a boulder was crushing her. The greylock slammed her and itself down. She gasped as she felt like she couldn't breathe. Her strength waned and she let go, the greylock getting up and lifting its clawed leg to eviscerate the girl that was just wrestling it. Akai looked up and felt the heat return in his chest. But he couldn't get up. But Ray wasn't just doing nothing while Kid distracted the other. He wasn't going to let his friend's daughter get hurt. An arrow whizzed past Akai, and the arrowhead dug into the greylock's onyx eye, sinking a few inches deep and causing it to cry out as blood spilled from the wound. It backed off and swung its head around before the arrow fell out, but leaving a nasty bloody hole where its eye once was. It turned and glared at Akai's father, standing in the middle of the clearing with his bow and his last arrow already in his hand. The beast charges, and Ray focused his arrow, and as Akai watched, time seemed to slow. He saw his father release the arrow and it shoot forwards, flying through the air, aiming for the beast's other eye. But to Akai's dismay, the creature wasn't as dumb as it looked. It closed its eye tightly, and the arrow only lightly cut its stony skin before being deflected away. Ray was already stepping to the side to dodge, but he was planning on it being blind now and unable to track him. It opened its eyes and turned some, managing to swipe and catch Ray's leg with its claws. 4 deep cuts appearing on the side of his calf, and the greylock wasn't stopping. Akai tried to shout, but the burning in his chest was growing and becoming more painful than ever before. Kid didn't hear him and was too focused on the greylock he had been fighting to dodge completely when he saw the other getting too close. Kid ducked a bite, but was still slammed by its chest, being knocked to the ground and stepped on as its charge didn't stop at just a hit. The weight of the greylock almost breaking bones as it briefly trampled him. Akai felt the same fear he felt when the bandits had caught him and his family, the burning pain in his chest igniting involuntarily. His muscles burned as he got back onto his feet, the wisps of orange fire circling him, turning into a small inferno of bright gold, the light behind his eyes enveloping them completely in the same vibrant yellow. All of Akai's nascent powers now laid bare for him to use. The only thought he could get through his mind coherently is, "I have to protect them," as he lunged forwards, each step leaving a burned imprint of his shoe in the forest floor as he rocketed forwards as fast as Kid had been. Akai jumped and punched down on the top of one of the greylock's heads, bright golden fire erupting from the impact as it was knocked down into the dirt. As soon as his foot hit the dirt, he spun and kicked its head with all of his might. Akai felt the bones in its head breaking against his foot. The one that hurt his father turned and saw the last hit, and recognition gleamed in the monster's eyes. It began charging again, but this time away. Not willing to fight anymore after witnessing Akai shattering the skull of its companion with his foot. Akai took a step to chase it, but the burning pain in his chest overwhelmed him. Kid was just lifting his head to look. Lamori had sit up onto her side, and Ray was watching while on the ground. They saw Akai's golden fire revert back to a normal orange flame and begin to disperse. His eyes dimmed back to normal, then he fell down onto his hands and knees, vomiting a scarily large amount of his own blood onto the slightly scorched dirt. Akai's vision went blurry as he felt like he was burned inside and out. Whatever power that god gave me, why does it hurt so much to use it? He thought to himself as every part of him felt weak. It hurt to move, to breathe. His heart hurt just to keep beating. Just as he was about to fall over onto his side, Kid got up and held him steady. "Are you okay?" Kid asked, but Akai didn't know how to answer. He tried to say something, but it only made him throw up again. At least this time it wasn't blood. He turned to look in the direction his father was, seeing Ray sitting up and bleeding from his leg. "Hey Akai, what are you doing?" Kid asked as the silver-haired boy forced himself to stand back up. He walked unsteady towards Ray. "Akai, don't stand up yet. Sit and rest," Ray told his son, but Akai didn't listen. Akai gritted his teeth as he kneeled next to his father, and Akai's hands became enveloped in orange fire. Kid ran up and tried to stop whatever Akai was going to do, but Akai shook him off as he said, "I feel like I can do this," weakly. The flames in his hands began turning golden like before, but much less intense in heat. His chest felt hot, but it wasn't burning in pain like it was before. Akai grabbed his father's wounded leg and the fire enveloped it for a few seconds. The wounds were not being healed, but the bleeding was being stopped. After a few seconds, Akai stopped and fell back into Kid's arms. Ray's leg wasn't healed, but the bleeding was stopped thankfully. Chapter 7, Bountiful Hunt. Akai was in a daze for a while afterwards. Lamoury managed to get back on her feet and grabbed a pack they had on the sled. Taking a roll of bandages, she approached and put a bandage around Ray's leg. Taking a few minutes for them to all rest and catch their breath, Lamoury asked, "So, are we taking that thing back with us too?" As she pointed at the now lifeless body of the Greylock. "It looks like it has a lot of meat on it. It'd be a pretty bountiful hunt if we take it too." They sat and rested for a while. Lamoury and Kid were a bit confused about what happened with Akai. From their perspective, he was fighting on the same level they were. But when things took a sour turn, his power changed. His fire changed from normal fire to something much more special. The way he moved seemed to change. Kid's own awakened skill with swords told him that the way Akai had moved was with no wasted movement. He chained his whole body into each hit. But whatever that yellow fire was, it was hurting his body just as much as it was empowering him. Akai only manifested it for less than 6 seconds, but that was enough strain to make him fall to his hands and knees, vomiting blood. Akai was fairly weak now, and despite Lamoury's bruises, she mustered the strength to carry him, and now the Greylock too, on the sled. Pulling the wooden sled over grass, bumps and roots as Ray limped beside her. The walk back to their village was uneventful, taking almost until sundown to get back. When they did return, Jennifer first saw that her husband was limping and her son was resting on the cart. It was only after that she saw the large grey monster beneath Akai that a moment of fear pierced her heart. From the village centre, where most of their fellow villagers were, she called out, "Ray, oh lords, what happened?" as she began running towards them. This caught the attention of a lot of the people, including Lamoury's and Kid's family. Everyone approached and saw Ray limping with Kid by his side, acting as support to help him walk. The cloth of Ray's pants leg ruined and bandages wrapped around his calf. Lamoury was sweating as she held the rope over her shoulder, pulling. Green energy faintly flowed over her whole body as she was very exhausted. Kid had a few bad bruises, Lamoury had more. On the cart, Akai was asleep and fairly pale, but he was steadily breathing. Jennifer ran up to Ray and grabbed onto his other side. Kid's mother, Christy, came and wrapped him in a hug. Lamori would collapse into her mother's arms when she came to, and Drake looked at what was on the cart. "What in the name of the gods happened?" Drake asked, taking the rope from his daughter. When Kid's father, Liam, approached, he cursed under his breath. How did you three kill a Greylock of all things?" he asked. Kid was trying to get out of his mother's embrace as she was being overprotective again and almost strangling him with how hard she was holding him. When he could finally get a word out, Kid began to explain the story, how they were surprised by the two of them. They fought, but the Greylocks were super tough. Kid said he couldn't cut through the skin at all, and the other one even overpowered Lamori. But Akai's power did something weird and turned his fire bright yellow. He killed this one and scared off the other before collapsing. Kid said Akai needs help because he is really hurt. Drake and Liam both had to work together to drag the sled with the Greylock after Lamori was being taken home. Neither one could pull it by themselves due to the beast's weight, which was shocking. Kid and his mother helped bring Akai to his home, following Akai's parents. The sight of an unconscious Akai and bandaged, limping Ray gave Lacey quite the fright when she opened the door to let them in. She didn't hesitate to help give attention to Ray's wounded leg, as Akai was laid down somewhere soft in the living room. "Oh my God," Jennifer said as she removed the bandages and saw how deep the cuts on her husband's calf was. But then both she and Lacey said at the same time, "Wait, why is there no blood?" Ray had to explain, "Well, I don't know what Akai did, but his fire turned a bright yellow, and when he put it on my wound, it eased the pain a little and the bleeding stopped. But it didn't close the wound." This raised questions for both of them, but Ray said, "I'm sure he can tell you more when he wakes up. But we're all exhausted right now." Kid brought Akai to lie in his bed upstairs. As Akai slept, he dreamed of being a knight again. In his dream, Akai was an adult with short silver hair. A beard of the same color covered his chin and cheeks, trimmed to a neat length. He stood in front of a mirror, golden yellow eyes looking back at him. Clad in beautiful blue plate mail, a young squire tightening the last plate to his body. "This duel will put an end to this war," he said, his voice deep yet smooth and confident. He looked down at the squire, a young lad with mildly tanned skin, around 12. The silver-haired man said, "You have done well." His praise caused the squire's eyes to light up in admiration. He bowed respectfully and said, "Thank you, sire." The boy, who had a head of black hair with the faintest purple hue to it, left the tent. The Blue Knight smiled and grabbed his helmet, an armet with a golden-yellow hair plume coming off the top. He tightened the strap, grabbed his heater shield, and sheathed his freshly sharpened sword. The warrior walked out of his battle tent and headed into the field between two standing armies. His side is adorned with the crest of a phoenix, golden in color over green background and gold trim. The opposing side had banners adorned with white banners with the profile of a woman with long, lustrous hair-colored gold. Approaching from the other side is a beautiful woman. She wore an armored dress of white scales, adorned with golden highlights to accentuate the beauty of her silver hair and ocean blue eyes. Her hair flowed in the wind, easily long enough to reach past her own waist. A staff made of solid white wood rested in her hands, a crown of 6 different colored jewels held together with platinum at the top, and a single jewel of solid black held at the bottom. The knight's boots stepped in the grass as his own short silver hair was swayed by the breeze. They stopped when standing roughly 20 yards apart. He stood tall and proud as the woman across from him held a serious gaze. Her lips thinned as she met eyes with the knight. "It is a pleasure to meet you again, Phoenix Pinken," she said coldly. The knight gave a small smile as he said in return, "Your beauty is still as radiant as ever, Frost Queen Alea." The Phoenix King gave a soft bow of his head, and the Frost Queen had to turn her head to look away for a moment. "So it seems you will not yield to our terms, then?" Frost Queen Alea asked. The Phoenix King shook his head slowly and said, "I'm sorry, but what you ask is more than I am willing to concede. This duel will determine who history calls righteous instead." "So be it," the Queen said as the air began to grow colder around her. As this happened, heat swelled within the king's body, and soon an aura of radiant golden fire formed around him, fighting off the bitter cold of the queen's pale blue aura of ice. The air began to grow restless, and the breeze grew strong between them. The Phoenix King lowered the visor to his helmet and slowly drew his sword. Around the queen, 6 spears of ice began to grow from snow that began to form in the air around her. Together they both said at the same time, "May our armies bear witness to this duel of champions. To spare our soldiers' blood, it is ours that will be spilled today. The victor of this duel shall be the victor of this battle." After their proclamation, silence encompassed the entire battlefield. Soon it would erupt into action. The Phoenix King conjured walls of golden fire around them and ran forwards. The air picked up and the Frost Queen stepped back, carried by the air itself as 3 of her 6 ice spears shot forwards. Further weapons made of pale blue ice began conjuring around her. The Phoenix King swung his sword, the blade leaving trails of flame as he fought to either parry or break these conjured spears. Each time his sword made contact, shockwaves of pressure erupted from where the weapons collided. Superheated air from the golden fire mixed with super-chilled air from the pale frost, and the wind intensified, growing stronger by the moment. The armies watched in awe as their leaders fought one another in the middle of this field. The Phoenix King's heat increased as more golden fire surrounded him, coalescing into vibrant feathered wings of his flame coming from his back. The ground beneath his feet scorched as he kicked off, wings flapping to send him speeding through the air like a bullet. The Frost Queen pulled both hands together to hold her staff as an ice storm began to form around her. A vortex of sharp shards and bitterly cold snow enveloped her, growing denser and denser. The second it took for the Phoenix King to reach her, it was intense enough to cause the edges of his armor to frost over, even despite his intense heat. An ice spear moved and blocked his sword. He raised his shield and deflected the other. The third glanced off his armor. The Frost Queen's steps appeared to ride on drifts of snow, allowing her incredible movement. The Phoenix King kept up the pressure, forcing her to focus on defense. Their fight continued in this manner for a full minute, dancing around the center of the field, sending out waves of fire and snow. The wind grew ever more turbulent as steam and vapor rose and filled the air, quickly gathering into a small cloud above the fight. After a minute of this constant pressure, the Phoenix King's wings grew larger as the heat inside him grew hotter. After parrying a few more spears, he saw an opening in the Frost Queen's defense. He moved as much of the heat within him to his hands as he solidified his footing. He thrust forth his shield, and a wave of fire rose, hitting against the Frost Queen's swirling shield of jagged ice, briefly blowing a hole through it as the ice turned to steam, stopping the golden fire. She glared at the Phoenix King with sharp blue eyes as he flapped his wings to speed forwards. Next, everything was obscured with clouds of steam as fire met ice. Neither army knew what the outcome of the fight was going to be, but looking up, the cloud that formed above the two had grown dark. And now, as more steam rose to join it, rain began falling over the center of the field, washing away the obstructing cloud of steam to show the result. The Phoenix King and Frost Queen both stood, but there was a clear victor. The Queen's staff lay cut in two on the ground, leaving her unable to as accurately focus her magic. Both her hands wrapped around the arm guard of the King's hand, currently holding the collar of her battle dress, and his sword raised, pointing straight at her and ready to strike. However, he did not get in this position unwounded. He had 2 spears of ice stabbing through his body, finding their way through gaps in his armor. He was lucky, however, as neither hit anything vital. He would live from these wounds. "Surrender, and you will be spared," he said, the wind carrying his voice across the field to the 2 silent armies. He ignored the ice slowly growing from the spear's wounds and the Frost Queen's hands on his arm as he stared her down. Many moments passed before she began trying to form a 3rd spear above her. The Frost Queen was unwilling to yield. The Phoenix King pulled his wings of golden fire closer as the heat intensified. He used his full willpower to call forth the heat within him. It began to hurt far worse than the spears of ice stabbing through him. The insides of his veins burned and his heart ached. The air inside his lungs grew too hot and it became painful to breathe. He strained to maintain this level, but he did so, letting it melt away the spears stabbing him as he briefly let go of her collar just to lean in, and his fingers gripped the soft skin of her neck. The Frost Queen winced in pain as her skin was singed beneath his gauntlet. Finally, she lost focus, and the forming spear of ice above her blew away as snow. She struggled to breathe in his grasp, but she spoke as firmly as she could. "What will you do with my people?" "Our land will merge into one. They will become citizens. Their mines will supply my industry, and my farms will feed them." A soft smile formed on the Frost Queen's face as she looked into the Phoenix King's eyes. She attempted to straighten her posture and let go of his arm holding her neck. With conviction, she said, "You may have won, but I refuse to not lead my own people." Before the Phoenix King could respond, what she said next nearly made him fall over in shock. "Instead of whatever fate you planned for me, I propose an alternative. You will marry me, we will rule both lands together." The next moment, Akai woke up in his bed with a jolt. The shock of hearing that, after an intense duel, managed to startle him awake. Just moments ago, he was dreaming with himself in the body of the Phoenix King Ken, staring down the enemy queen. He looked around and rubbed the back of his head, seeing he was in his bedroom. Akai looked out of the window and stared at the star-filled sky just outside. He sighed and said, "First one of those dreams in a while." Chapter 8. Rest. The following morning, Akai was shirtless downstairs. He winced as Lacey stood behind him, applying some salve to the awful bruise he has between his shoulders. "It feels like it's freezing me," he complained, but Lacey just gently tapped the other bruise hidden by his hair. Akai winced and she said, "That's the whole point. This is mostly mint. Now stop squirming." Akai tried to sit still as she continued applying the salve, his mother in the kitchen preparing breakfast as his father sat with fresh bandages on his leg and a crutch leaning against his side. Ray said, "We are lucky to be alive, honestly. Greylocks are pretty dangerous, but they were never supposed to be this far south of the mountain. Something happened to drive them away." Across from Ray sat Kid's father, Liam. Liam sighed and leaned on the table some. His vermilion eyes looked over at Akai, who was trying not to wince as Lacey was rubbing in the salve. "We'll have to report this, you know," Liam said with mild annoyance. "I hate making these kinds of reports." "That means someone has to make a special trip to the city," Ray said, tapping his bandaged leg. "Not going to be me, though," he added. Liam leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose for a moment. "I'll go and take some of the other villagers with us." Akai looked up and turned a bit to face Liam, but just as quickly a wooden fork flew from the kitchen past his head. Jennifer said sternly, "Don't you even think about it, young man." Akai looked back at her before Lacey pushed him a little, making Akai lean forwards and said, "Hold still. I got to do the bruise under your hair next," as she brushed his silver hair off his shoulders. "When you're in the city, reach out to the academy. See if they'll send a tutor or something to teach these dunderheads how to not almost kill themselves trying to fight monsters," Jennifer commented, going back to fixing breakfast. "Sautéing some garden vegetables with leftovers from dinner last night. I'll ask, but they typically charge out the nose for private tutors." "We'll see," Liam said, catching himself to try not and curse casually. "We'll leave right after the festival the rest of the people want to host. Or to take maybe a little over a week to get there and back if we make good time and don't dawdle." "Speaking of the festival, how is it coming along?" Lacey asked as she was gently rubbing the mint salve into Akai's scalp now. Liam said, "It's coming. The butchers are having a hard time cutting through that Greylock's hide, but they're already planning what to cook and a section in the village center for everyone. The village head wants you to help with decorations, Jennifer." "Ooh, I have a few good ideas. I'll get on that," she said as she began serving plates of breakfast to everyone present. After breakfast, Akai was finally let free to go outside. But he was threatened by his mother with a wooden serving spoon to not get in any more trouble. Akai may be able to fight off a monster in the forest, but he knew better than to try and defy his mother. He promised to behave and left after putting on a shirt. At the smithy, Akai poked his head in and saw Emmy was inside, sharpening a number of knives as a guy wearing a bloody brown apron sat on a stool, complaining, "I still can't believe that thing's hide is so tough, blunting all my nice knives just trying to skin it." Emmy looked up and saw Akai and she smiled. "Well, if you want to complain about so much free meat, the hunter it right there." and pointed with the half-sharpened knife before putting it back to the whetstone on the bench. The man turned around confused before his eyes widened. Akai waved a little with an awkward smile before saying, "It's okay, trust me." Before the man said, "You're walking already. Geez, you kids are tough. But don't worry, I'll make sure you get the best cuts." Turning his attention away from the guy in charge of butchering the Greylock, Akai asked, "Is Lamory doing okay?" Emmy nodded and said, "She's in her room sulking. Go up and see her," as she focused on resharpening the number of butcher's knives. Akai walked past through the forge and to the attached living space, heading through before finding Lamory's room up a set of stairs. He slowly opened the door before hearing, "I already told you, Mum. I want to stay inside today." The brown-haired girl was laying on her side in the bed, reading a book. She had on a light tunic and pants. Akai can see bruising on the back of her arms and neck, most hidden beneath the shirt. "It's me, Lamory," he said quietly, but his voice still made Lamory almost jump in bed as she straightened out. She sat up and looked at him, the two locking eyes for a moment. Then Akai had to duck to avoid a book sent flying at him. "Don't you dare scare me like that," she shouted, trying to get up, but her knee buckled and she fell back onto her bed with a wince. Ignoring her outburst, Akai walked in and asked, "Are you okay?" "Am I okay? You saw me get body slammed by a living boulder. I'm lucky I didn't break anything." Lamory grumbled, "It hurts to lay on my back, and it hurts even worse to walk right now." Akai sat down on the bed next to her and said, "I know." Lamory looked down and clenched her fists a few times, feeling frustrated about something. Akai gently nudged her, silently urging her to talk. "I was cocky with this new power. I think we all were. And we would have died if you didn't do whatever the heck you did. Which you still owe me an explanation for." "I'm not sure what I did, Lamory, but it felt the same when I was facing Kel. It felt unbearably hot inside my chest, and I could only think about protecting you guys. Then the heat inside just spilled over. Next thing I know, the heat stopped hurting, and my body felt almost weightless. And I moved before knowing what I was doing. I guess it was instinct. But when I relaxed, everything hurt. It felt like my insides were on fire. I almost blacked out from the pain." "And the thing you did to stop your father's bleeding?" Lamory asked. "I don't know. I just saw him hurt and knew I could help. I pulled that feeling of heat back and pushed it into his leg. It just worked." The two sat in silence for a bit before Lamory groaned again, trying to stand up. Akai held out a hand and she used him as support to pull herself all the way up. Akai asked, "Does your mum know you can barely walk?" To which she shook her head. "No, and I don't want to." "Why?" "Because then she and Dad are going to make me take some disgusting tasting medicine until I get better. And the stuff they make me take, I would seriously rather eat Old Man Elmer's fried fish again." Akai shivered at the mention of the old man's fish-shaped pieces of charcoal. "Those things could be used to build a house and outlast the king's castle," he muttered. "Well, anyways," Akai said, trying to get his train of thought back on track. Lacey knew how to make a salve that really helped with the bruises and muscle strain, but it was not pleasant to actually put on. Lamory thought about a salve instead of some kind of medicinal drink, then blushed when she realized that Akai would probably want to apply it, and she did not want to think about her friend rubbing something all over her back and legs. She shook her head as her face became a bit flushed, and then said while trying not to face him, "I don't think that would work either." Akai rubbed the back of his head and was at a bit of a loss how to help other than let her take time to recover. They stood there awkwardly for a bit before Lamory said, "Have you checked in on Kid yet?" Trying to change the subject away from herself. "No, I haven't," Akai admitted before Lamory pushed him, making herself fall back on the bed. She said, "Well, go do it," as she hurriedly made herself lay back on the bed how she was originally. But then she looked and couldn't find her book and slumped, remembering now that she had thrown it. "And, can you grab my book for me, please?" she asked under her breath in defeat. Akai did so before leaving, closing the door behind him. He did notice the title of the book she was reading, which was a collection of popular myths and folk tales in their country. It took Akai about 15 minutes to walk to Kid's house, where he heard an argument going on inside. Curious, Akai peeked through the window and saw what was happening. Kid was shouting, "I'm perfectly fine, Mom, it's okay," while his mother was trying to wrestle him down into a chair, yelling in return, "Young man, I let you out of my sight for 5 minutes and you got hurt again. You are not going outside ever again." Kid saw the iconic silver hair of his friend as he struggled against his mother before smiling. "I promise I'll come back for dinner," he said. His mother stopped and looked at him. She squinted and said, "You wouldn't dare." Kid only smiled before electricity crackled around him. He quickly escaped her grasp and ran out the front door before she could react. Christy stood up straight and took a deep, slow breath. Before she yelled, "Kid Fuller," at the top of her lungs. Before she could turn and spot him, Akai ducked and quickly ran away. Kid caught up with him after he got a few houses away and broke line of sight with the Fuller house. Akai asked, "Your mother really didn't like what happened, did she?" And Kid replied, "The minute Dad left, she wouldn't let me stand up without trying to help me. You and Lamori are the ones that got the worst of it. I just feel a little sore." Kid walked in front of Akai and stood, asking, "So, are you going to tell me what happened to make you go, all super like that?" Akai rubbed the back of his head gently before sighing. He repeated the same thing he did with Lamori, that he felt the need to protect them and the heat inside him boiled over. After that, he moved on instinct and didn't really think about what he was doing. "Anyways, your father is going to be taking a few villagers after the festival and head to the city to report what happened." "Yeah, I heard him complaining to Mom about that all morning. He really hates doing paperwork and has to go to the adventuring guild, which he politely called bureaucratic hell, whatever that means." Kid put both of his hands behind his head and began walking leisurely, Akai following and keeping pace. "Your girlfriend doing okay?" he said casually, eliciting a groan from Akai, who said, "She's not my girlfriend." Exasperatedly, "She is going to be okay, though she is struggling to walk on her own right now." "Damn, that bad?" Kid asked before stopping. He squinted ahead before turning and taking a different route. Akai looked ahead and saw they were heading to the road that Kid usually took to the training field and saw his angry mother stomping around ahead of them. Akai didn't feel like being scolded for Kid's stunt, so he quickly followed, leaving before she could spot them. As they walked through the village, they saw many of the other people working on decorations for the festival they were holding at the end of the week. Some of them waving as they noticed Akai and Kid passing, both fairly distinctive because of their hair color. "Well, let's hope she's doing better by the time the festival happens," Kid mentioned. Finally, Akai had to ask, "Where are we going?" Kid smirked and shrugged, saying, "Well, my mother is thinking we're heading to the training field. She'll then head to some of the other places I sneak off to. Then she'll talk to our families after that. We'll stop by your place, so at least you won't get in trouble by the time she gets there." "All right, I do have an idea on what we can do since I am definitely hurting a bit too much to swing a sword," Akai said. "Oh yeah? Out with it then," Kid said, looking over his shoulder as they walked to face his friend. "Train our powers to get a better grip on what we can and can't do. We obviously have limits and need to find out where they are. Won't they teach us that in the academy when we're 14? Yeah, but what if something else dangerous shows up before then? There's still another Greylock out there. I'd rather be prepared." Kid thought for a moment and agreed. "Yeah, that's true. I couldn't really cut it, and it managed to overpower Lamori. And you got really hurt when you pushed yourself." Akai and Kid continued to idly talk and eventually made it out of the edge of the village and up the road to Akai's home. There, Kid's father Liam was still inside talking with Ray. Lacey was sitting outside, drawing in a sketchbook that Akai's family managed to buy for her. She looked up and waved gently. Her eyes lingered on Kid for a few moments before looking back down, returning to her drawing. Akai went in and told Liam that Kid was here and they would be out behind the house. Liam, of course, sighed and asked, "Does Christy know he's here?" And seeing Akai look to the side, not answering straight away, Liam just said, "I'll cover for you." Akai nodded and headed around the house with Kid. There, they began trying to brainstorm how to train without hurting themselves. Chapter 9, Meditation. Kid and Akai were behind the house, practicing using their powers more. To get around not putting too much strain on their bodies, they were seeing what they could do for range attacks. It took them a few hours, but Kid managed to come up with something. He brought his hands together and arcs of lightning formed between his palms. He was able to make it grow more intense and then pushed his hands forwards, the lightning jolting forwards. But after a few feet, it diverted straight down to the ground. This was the best Kid could manage for now. Akai thought back to one of his dreams and decided to envelop his fist with flame. His fire was a normal orange flame right now. He was scared to try and call on the heat inside himself to make it turn yellow like before. But when he punched out, he tried to throw the heat with it. Small bolts of fire did jet forwards after his punch, but like Kid's attempts, it didn't survive further than a few feet. Akai imagined throwing a fireball, but it had the same end result as well. The fire extinguished after it left contact with him. They didn't get much progress on advancing this, though, because they heard a shout coming from the house. "Kid Fuller, you are in so much trouble," before a very angry Christie began stomping from around the corner. Kid sighed and knew the jig was up. If he ran away now, his mother would probably break his legs to keep him from doing it again. Kid put up his hands and tried to give his mother a smile, but before he could say anything, she was pinching his ear and dragging him away. "Ow, ow, Mom. Easy," he muttered. But she said, "Easy? You want easy? This is my easy. I swear to the gods, Kid, do you want to give me a heart attack?" Akai watched as Kid was dragged away, and soon Liam was being pulled along too. Luckily, Liam was only being pulled by his wrist and not his ear like their son. With that, Akai went back inside. Kid was thoroughly in trouble now, so they couldn't train anymore. He rested for the rest of the day and went to check on Lamori, though he didn't need to walk inside the smithy to hear how she was doing. Retching was heard coming from upstairs before Lamori loudly whined, "This is so unbelievably gross, Mom. Please, why is this medicine so gross?" "Looks like she wasn't able to keep that secret away from her parents," he muttered. He stepped in and saw Drake already at the forge, making nails by the dozen. "Good morning, boy," Drake said before they heard Lamori's whining continue upstairs. Akai saw Drake trying to suppress some kind of emotion. "Is the medicine that bad?" Akai asked and saw a shiver run up Drake's spine. "Yeah, that stuff Emmy makes is horrid. The most bitter thing I've ever tasted, but it helps recovery more than anything else I've tried." Akai gave a sympathetic look, not feeling so bad about the minty salve he had put on him now. "You can go back home and rest, though. Be better for the festival. I can handle the forge myself till then," Drake said, waving Akai away. "Are you sure?" Akai asked, Drake answering with, "Of course, boy. Go home and rest." Akai let out a soft sigh, not sure what to do for the rest of the day. He got up and said, "Thank you, Mr. Holt," politely before heading out. For the next few days, Akai stayed home. He stayed inside and began rereading some of their books. They didn't have many due to books not being super easy to produce, though books weren't as expensive as they could be. Scholars wanting to awaken sorcery did a lot of reading and writing both, so books were often copied by them as part of their training. Akai even once heard some of the awakened sorcerers even use magic to copy books to make money when not doing other things. But he wasn't sure if that was true or not. When not inside reading, Akai was outside. As he was about to practice with his fire again, Ray stepped out with the crutch. "Hey," Ray called. Akai stopped and turned around. "Got a moment? I had an idea I wanted to share with you." Akai nodded, and when his father sat down on the grass, Akai did so as well. Ray spoke up, saying, "When I was back in the army as a scout, we had an officer who was awakened with a blessing from Neolength." Neolength, Akai remembered, was the god of death, depicted as a gentle figure with pale skin and dark robes, guiding those who had passed to the afterlife which he presides over. Akai remembered a story about Neolength once coming to claim the soul of an evil king who refused to leave his throne even after having his subjects revolt and kill him. The king fought back, and Neolength had summoned a simple hand scythe and a chain. The chain wrapped around the sword and shattered it, then bound the king's body. The scythe was used to cut his soul from his body like cutting grain from the field. The chains then wrapped around the king's soul and pulled him to the underworld, where he would spend an eternity reflecting on his evil ways. "Akai, you there?" Ray asked, waving his hand in front of Akai's face. Akai shook his head and asked, "Huh? Yeah, what did you want to tell me?" Ray shook his head and said, "Don't space out like that, it's impolite. before getting to what he wanted to say. Anyways, we had an officer with a blessing too, though his affinity was with shadows. But he used it like you can use your fire, strengthening himself. Akai nodded along and asked, what was his name? And Ray shrugged. I don't remember. I don't remember much about him. But part of his training wasn't just throwing attacks or working out his muscles. He sat in one place and focused to control his powers better. He practiced controlling shadows by making things out of them. You could try that with your fire. Akai softly nodded, thinking about it some. It did make sense. Control was the thing he lacked the most right now. Meditating is something that he did often, which is what I just described. Ray gently leaned forwards and ruffled Akai's shaggy silver hair and said, that's something you can do when you're tired or recovering. You don't need to move much to do it. Akai smiled brightly and nodded, saying, yes, sir, I'll give that a try. Before getting up, he helped his dad stand up and walk back to the house. Ray was going to take a while before he could comfortably walk on his injured leg again. Akai did exactly what his father suggested. He sat down and tried to focus. He conjured the fire and did practice making it follow his commands. He could manipulate the fire fairly easily, but his normal fire wasn't what gave him trouble. Reluctantly, Akai did try calling forth the heat in his chest. He did it slowly, and it did feel uncomfortable, but doing it gently didn't seem to cause pain. Soon the fire around him began to change as he let the heat move from inside him to the outside. The fire changed to have a few streaks of golden yellow through it, but any more than just this began to hurt immensely, feeling like it was burning his insides. Akai let go of that heat and clutched his chest as he took deep breaths. The first few were incredibly hot and felt like exhaling steam, but as he breathed, it cooled down. He checked over himself and didn't feel any lasting pain or injury. That felt dangerous, he muttered. I shouldn't do that too often, but maybe I can get better at it. Akai spent the rest of the day focusing on trying to get a better grasp on his power. Before the sun set, he walked to Lamori's and kids' houses. His mother made some fried veggie balls for dinner and wanted him to bring a few to them. Akai shared what his father suggested with Lamori, who was not that hungry because of the medicine. So you're saying I should try sitting still and controlling the power instead? Akai nodded, saying, I'm thinking maybe you could increase how much strength you have. Your affinity is water too, so maybe you could learn how to do some stuff with that. I can conjure and control fire some, so maybe you could do the same with water. She thought for a moment and nodded. That's fair, but I'm not sure what to do. Well, I'd love to help, but I'm not sure how your powers work, he said softly. After a moment, Lamoury perked up and said, I'll give it a shot and tell you how it goes. Thanks, I'll tell the same to Kid. Well, assuming his mom would let me. Lamoury looked at Akai and sighed dramatically. She put a hand on his shoulder and said, You lived a good life, Akai. Causing him to laugh a little, giving Lamoury a gentle side hug, he stood up and left. Though, when he hugged her, he didn't know why her cheeks turned red. Akai hoped she wasn't getting sick, because that would suck on top of her hurt body. Akai went to Kid's home and Christy was glaring daggers at Akai. She sorta blamed him and Lamoury for Kid getting hurt. Liam was the one that invited him inside, and Akai shared the same info with Kid in front of his parents, which made Christy's stare flip like a switch. Oh, that's wonderful. He can prepare for the academy without getting hurt. Hear that, sweetie? The overprotective mother said with a smile, catching Kid by surprise, who stared at his mom in shock. Liam took the food from Akai and whispered, Might want to head out before Christy gets any ideas. Akai nodded and headed out, leaving Kid to his new fate. Over the week, Kid, Lamoury, and Akai all stayed at their homes practicing the meditation thing Ray suggested. Akai hadn't felt like he made too much progress and was unaware of how Lamoury and Kid were progressing. Time did begin to fly, and soon enough, Akai found himself in his room. His mother was making him wear his nice clothes and styling his hair for him. Is this really necessary? Akai asked as his mother was brushing his hair. Yes, it is. This whole celebration is about you and your friends, so you gotta look your best, she told him. Grabbing a black cloth hair tie, Jennifer pulled the hair from behind his ears and back into a short ponytail, leaving his bangs and a little extra intact. He had a nice vest over a shirt tucked into his pants. His mother even polished his shoes for him, which Akai thought may have been a bit too much. But he knew better than to complain too much, so he let her get him ready. His mum seemed to be having fun doing it either way. Once Akai was dressed properly, she said, "Now come down and eat. I made pancakes." Akai smiled and rushed downstairs. He saw Lacey sitting at the table with her own plate stacked with pancake. She was wearing a very pretty green dress and had her strawberry blonde hair behind her in a lovely-looking braid. He tried not to stare a bit, but he couldn't stop himself from saying, "You look really nice today, Lacey." "Oh, thank you," she replied, but turned to look at the pancakes. She gently placed a few fingers over her burn scar on her left cheek, still rather self-conscious about it. But she seemed to take the compliment well. Akai grabbed a plate and sat down. He soon saw his father coming down with his mother's help. Ray was walking better now, but he definitely still needed the crutch to walk on his own. Akai cheerfully said, "Good morning, Dad," before taking a bite of the pancakes. Buttered and had some sweet berries in them. Ray gave Akai a mock salute with a smirk before he sat down at the table as well. Genia returning with 2 plates, and the 4 of them sat together eating. Between bites, Akai did share some info about his dreams, saying, "I had another one of those dreams again, but it wasn't anything too important this time." Akai began to describe the dream like he had many times before. He was in the role of the knight, which he now knew was named the Phoenix King Ken. The Phoenix King was standing on the edge of a training field outside of the keep of the city they were in. Everywhere below this elevated plateau, the fortified keep rested on. The locals were preparing to host festivities. Regarding the upcoming marriage, he was still surprised was happening. The king's attention was drawn back to his squire, the kid with a mild tan and dark hair that had purple hues to it. The king raised a wooden sword and parried a flurry of incoming attacks before skillfully moving, disarming, then lightly tapping the boy with his sword. "You're getting better, Itsu. Keep up at this rate, and when you're grown, you'll make a wonderful champion." The kid looked up, his black eyes beaming with pride at the compliments. "Yes, sir, thank you," he said, before running to retrieve his training sword. "That should be enough for today, though," the king said. "Catch." After tossing the sword, his squire Itsu grabbed it out of the air. He returned them to an equipment rack. Some days Ken couldn't believe that he became the king of this land. His clan won the nomination, and his father gracefully let him assume the throne, staying back and remaining as head of the vassal clan. As Ken was lost in this thought, he heard noise behind him. Turning, one of the royal guards was tripped over, and the gate heading into this training field was opened by a swarm of kids from the city. A smile spread across the king's face as the kids all rushed him. They were holding toy weapons, and soon the king was in the middle of a mock battle. The guard was getting up, but a quick look from the king told him to leave it be. Itsu was a good bit older than these kids, so he didn't feel right to join in, staying off to the side. Ken played along and soon was defeated and made an overly dramatic scene where he was slain in the middle of battle. He lowered to the ground and closed his eyes, soon hearing a couple whines of the kids, "No, we didn't want to kill you, and don't be dead." He only opened one eye and all the kids saw that, before he closed it again, but couldn't hold back a soft chuckle. A little more playing dead to tease them before he sat up. Then ushered the kids away to go play somewhere else, because he did have things he had to do. Akai's dream didn't last much longer after that. Ray ruffled his hair and said, "Ah, that was a cute dream. I remember playing something like that with you when you were smaller." After breakfast, Akai and his family were brought into the village. He saw how much progress had been made since he decided to stay home. The village center was covered in all sorts of decorations, and there was even an effigy to the god Miog made by the farmers. Lanterns were set up around the village center, ready with candles to light once it gets dark. Right now in the morning, things were still being prepared, and it was not officially time to celebrate. Akai saw 2 stands made next to each other. Twin sisters in their 40s named Rena and Kara were decorating, and he could tell from the looks they gave each other they were trying to consistently one-up one another. Ray, leaning on his wife, gently patted Akai then Lacey with his crutch. He told them, "Go on, go socialize with the other youths. The celebration officially starts at noon, so be back by then." Akai nodded and ran off, but Lacey looked a bit confused. Jennifer added, You too, Lacey. You're 16, but you're still just a girl. Go, find someone to make friends with. A bit hesitantly, Lacey said, "Oh, okay," as she seemed quite nervous about this. Despite living here for a little over 2 years now, she hasn't socialized much with some of the others. Poor girl is still so worried about her scars. Jennifer muttered to Ray as the teen began walking off. Akai soon found Kid, or it would be more accurate to say Kid found Akai. Akai felt a mild zap behind him as he walked and turned to see Kid holding out a hand with some sparking coming from it. Tag is the only word he said before turning and running. He was fast, but he was not cheating and boosting his speed. Akai took only a second to know what was up before he started sprinting after the red-headed Kid. Over by the smithy, Lamori was sitting at the dining table with a sullen look. She was all dressed up in a pretty green vest over a white shirt. A red skirt reached past her knees, but in front of her was a single cup with a deep dark green liquid inside of it. Lamori could swear she saw a bubble rise in it as she looked up at her mother with desperate, pleading eyes. "Mom," she whimpered before Emmy gave Lamori the signature motherly look, making the girl wince and realize she really had no way out of this. Drake, intentionally, was outside. He didn't even want to look at that drink. "This is the last one, Lamori. Drink it and you're done," Emmy said, and Lamori visibly pouted. She grabbed the cup and reflexively gagged when it got close to her lips. She took a deep breath, and the green energy of her power began forming over her. She needed all the strength she had to be able to drink even just one more sip of this vile medicinal beverage. Once she had the courage, Lamoury brought it to her lips and tilted her head back, gulping it down as fast as she could. As soon as the cup was empty, she dropped it onto the table and was retching from the bitter taste. Now that it was over, Emmy gave Lamoury some normal tea, to which the girl swiftly gulped it down, trying to wash the taste of that medicine out of her mouth. "Good, now don't strain yourself too much, but you're welcome to go out until the festival starts. Be in the village center by noon," Emmy said before walking out. Lamoury quickly rose to her feet and took an unsteady step at first, but then a much more solid one after. She walked fairly normally at a casual pace, wanting to find her friends and get as far away from that wretched cup as fast as possible. Which soon enough she did, spotting Akai running with Kid chasing behind him. "Hey," she called out, catching their attention. Akai stopped running abruptly, and a moment later both he and Kid came crashing to the ground, Kid running into Akai at full speed, not expecting him to just suddenly stop. From the ground, Kid groaned as Akai waved a hand on his back and smiling up at Lamoury from the odd position. "Good morning." Lamoury rolled her eyes and helped them up onto their feet and brushing the dust off their clothes. "Geez, you two. You're wearing your nice clothes. Be thankful this road is stone and not dirt," she complained. "Hey, Lamoury, you feeling better?" Kid said after she brushed off his back. "I'm walking, aren't I?" She retorted, "Fair, fair. Was that medicine really as bad as you were making it out to be? Gods, don't mention that disgusting, vile, horrid drink. I don't want to remember it." "I can still taste it," she said, almost shouting at him as she dusted off her own skirt after patting Akai's shoulders off. Chapter 10, Festival Day. Akai, Kid, and Lamoury had spent most of the morning together. After an hour, they saw Lacey by herself and decided to hang out with her as well. Akai knew Lacey was a fairly quiet girl and tended to keep to herself. Lacey did feel a bit awkward hanging around with 10-year-olds, but it was less awkward than her trying to socialize with people her age. It was to be expected with her past. She knew these three did try to make her feel at home and appreciated it. She found herself and the three in a field of wheat, still not quite ready for harvest. The nearby barley fields had already been harvested, however. She sat beneath the strange ancient oak tree, its green leaves starting to just get hints of yellow to them. Autumn is just now starting. Lacey drew lines across the paper with a stick of graphite. In front of her, Kid was striking a pose. She drew one last line before turning around her sketchbook to show him. "That is awesome," Kid said with excitement, running up to inspect it. Kid, gushing over the sketch, brought a genuine smile to Lacey's face. "Not to kill the moment, you two, but it's about time we head back." Lamoury shouted. She was sitting on a branch of the tree above them. Kid turned and looked, seeing the sun high in the sky now, close enough to noon. He nodded and said, "Yeah, Lamori's right," before offering out a hand to help Lacey get up. She hesitated for a moment before gently taking his hand and getting up. "All right," she softly spoke. Lamori carefully jumped off the tree, landing with a thud as her feet planted themselves. From around the other side of the tree, Akai came and joined them on their walk back. As they got closer, they saw everyone was out in the village center. When they were spotted, people began ushering Akai, Kid, and Lamori ahead. Lacey was brought forwards so she could stand around the front of the crowd around the village center. A small stage had been quickly erected. The square was covered in decor hanging from buildings, and many of the villagers were beaming with excitement. Many tables and stalls set out with food and drink. Fresh baked goods with fruits from the forest, pale ale, cider, and many dishes with meat as the focus. The greylock meat was plentiful, having a slight gamey taste resembling wild bison in taste. Kid even saw his mother beside the stage and was shocked to see her with her old harp. Christy had once been a rather talented harp player, but she slowly stopped, and Kid was never told why. But seeing her there filled his heart with a nostalgic warmth. Walking onto the stage was an ancient-looking man, the current elder of this village, who was their leader. But as he stepped onto the stage, there were a bunch of murmurs as a man they hadn't seen before walked onto stage, or at least Akai and his friends hadn't. Neither had some of the other young people in the village, but the older villagers around his father's age and older suddenly stood straight. The elder walked with a slight hunch to his back and a cane in his hand. Behind him stood a tall, regal-looking man with well-groomed black hair. He was wearing a black suit with a white thread trim to it, intricate patterns embroidered over an exposed shoulder of his jacket, and a red cloak draped over the other shoulder. He had a cane as well, but it was not because he needed it to walk. It was adorned with a silver head, and clearly just for fashion. The elder spoke. "Today we celebrate a great occasion. This year, for the first time since I was a young lad, we had people awaken divine blessings in our humble village." The elder's gaze swept over the crowd and landed first on Kid, waving him forward. Then Lamori, and lastly Akai. They approached the stage, and the man in regal clothing was inspecting them visually. Akai had a strange feeling when he felt the assumed noble's gaze linger on him. We had not just one, but 3 young kids awaken, all within 3 months of one another. The elder turned to face Akai and said, "Come up here, boy. You were the first and the most important." Akai looked nervous, but he did climb onto the stage. The elder grasped Akai's hand and forearm with both hands, balancing his cane on his own forearm by letting it hang from the crook. "We are grateful, boy. Your awakening moment saved this village from an attack from the kettlebell outlaws. You even personally took care of their leader, Kel. For that, I am eternally grateful." Akai looked up and had a smile, seeing the genuine warmth in the elder's voice, holding pride in Akai's achievement. "Indeed," spoke a gravelly voice. The noble said, "I heard of your achievement and decided to visit Rowan village myself." Whilst looking down at Akai, the noble never removed his hands from the top of his silver-adorned cane, however, a statement that he still saw a commoner such as Akai as beneath him, even as an awakened, refusing to even gesture towards the kid and his actions. "I am the lord of this region, Margrave Geoffrey Sorey II of the Southern March." He looked down at Akai, and Akai looked back a bit. He felt like he was supposed to reply. The elder said, "Introduce yourself, boy, and speak about your feat." "Oh, my name is Akai Ryneveld, sir." Akai softly bowed his head respectfully. "In all honesty, I do not remember much about what I did." Akai turned to look at Lamori, who was standing nervously before the small stage. "My friend Lamori here can retell it best. She was there to witness it." The Margrave turned his gaze a bit dismissively towards Lamori, who felt a shiver crawl up her spine under his scrutiny. "Step up and speak," he said in a voice gentle but with authority. Lamori quickly climbed up onto the stage, taking just one leaping step up, instead of carefully hopping up like Akai did. "Yes, sir," she said before beginning to retell the story of what happened. Everyone in the village around to finally hear what actually happened from the source, and not from a rumor. She shared about how the bandits came and set fire to their house, looking for a friend who lived there, wanting to smoke them out. Akai and his father Ray returned from a hunting trip and tried to catch the bandits by surprise, but was spotted and captured too. Lamori mentioned how one struck her mother. Kel himself beat Akai's father before beating Akai himself enough to break multiple ribs. But it was at threat of killing his mother, Jennifer, did Akai gain a divine blessing, assuming it to be from Svendar. She described how Akai exploded into a tornado of fire that only became even more intense as it became an unnatural golden yellow in color. Even though the fire washed over her and everyone else, it only hurt the bandits and left herself unscathed. She didn't even feel anything more than a mild warmth from the fire, but it burnt the ropes binding them to ash in moments. Akai overpowered Kel completely, then sent forth his fire to deal with the rest of the bandits, both around him and through the village. Once she was done retelling the story, the Margrave nodded. His gaze returned to Akai and stared for a moment with a calculating expression. Then a soft smile that would fool most people, but Akai could feel instinctually it was fake. "You did good, Akai Ryneveld," the noble said before giving Akai a single pat on the back. "I will be sure to follow your performance when you enter the Awakened Academy." After a moment of silence washed over the crowd, Margrave Geoffrey Sorey turned. He said, "Enjoy your festivities," before walking off the stage and rejoining his retinue of personal guards. This was followed by another small speech from the elder, and he called forth Kid as well. Then he went first to Akai. "You, blessed by Svendar, I honor you with a permanent residence of your own once you come of age, should you, for some reason, choose to not inherit your parents' estate." He said the same thing to Lamori, noting that she was blessed by Mio, though when she got to Kid, he furrowed his brows. He said, "I can't quite recall what God had blessed you, young Fuller." Kid then smiled and said, "Nobody had ever asked. It's about time someone did," while trying to hold back a mischievous chuckle. The elder looked amused, but off to the side Christie looked horrified, no doubt feeling very embarrassed about realizing this, and the same could be said for Liam somewhere in the crowd. "Well then, young Fuller, what did you hear when you awakened?" the elder asked with reverence in his voice. "Your blade is quick, your reflexes faster. Lightning courses through your veins, I will make it go even further beyond. Inherit my skill with the sword, Kid Fuller. Do so, and one day you will fight alongside me." Everyone seemed shocked at how straightforward of a message Kid had received. There was no doubt Kid had received a blessing from Anku, the god of warfare. "Young man, you are truly remarkable. Never in my years had I ever heard of a god speaking one's name when giving a divine blessing, even inviting you to one day fight by his side. Truly, you have been given an incredible blessing." With that, the elder nodded to Kid's mother, who had an odd look on her face from hearing this. The last thing she wanted was Kid gallivanting around on a battlefield and getting hurt. But to be invited by a god themselves to do so, she wasn't sure if she had the right to deny him now. She leaned forwards in her chair and took a deep breath. She flexed her fingers for a second before starting to play a simple melody on the harp. Beautiful music filled the town center as a number of other villagers with their own instruments joined in. Lutes, flutes, and a drum filled everyone's ears with happy music. "Go enjoy yourselves, kids. You have more than earned it," the elder said, heading off the stage. Some of the very young kids were getting excited about the free food and the music, already running around now. The two twins had their stands ready, Rona and Kara, side-eyeing one another as they were preparing different kinds of sweets for everyone. The elder moved to his house, one of the houses overlooking the center clearing of the village. He went inside and came out with a lit pipe in his mouth, sitting on a chair on his porch and puffed slowly on it as he watched his people enjoy themselves. Some people began dancing to the music, drinking and socializing with the drinks provided, and others were eating their fill. About an hour into the celebration, Ray was sat at a table with Drake. Liam joined them, and so did a few of the other men of the village. They began drinking the pale ale. The conversation started simple, but soon drifted to Liam and Ray swapping stories from their army days. Elsewhere, a couple of teens did get in trouble for trying to pull a few pranks. What was especially popular was trying to goad the two twin women into arguments as they gave out sweets from their competing stalls. Akai had seen two young men, not much older than Lacey, leaning on one of the stalls, giving one compliments on the sweets before turning their attention to the other's food, continuing until the two women got into a yelling match with one another and someone had to step in and settle things down a bit. Akai returned his attention to what he and Kid were doing, Lamori and Lacey watching, already having had their turns. Before Akai and Kid was a little stand where one of the older women of the village was sat. She had set up a game where her husband, a man with hair grayed from age but still a strong body, would compete in throwing small sacks of beads at marks on the ground. Whoever at the end had more of these bags centered within the opposing side's target would win. She was giving away little prizes to whoever could beat her husband. She had wooden toys, dolls, and miscellaneous trinkets she had made. So far, her husband had been going easy on the small kids of the village, around 6 and younger. Akai and his friends had an awkward age range regarding the village kids. The oldest ones behind them were going to turn 7 come winter, and the next oldest after them were already around 15. Akai, Lamori, and Kid were all 10 right now, and judging from how the husband played against Lamori and Lacey, he wasn't going to be intentionally doing bad to let them have fun. He was going to make them earn the prize if they wanted it. Akai was going first and was having trouble. He was given 4 bags and was allowed to make the first toss. He overshot it by a wide margin, and the husband's next throw was almost a perfect bullseye. Akai looked down and furrowed his brows before trying to focus. He felt the weight of the bag and steadied himself to toss it with less strength. He lowered it and stepped forwards for an underhanded toss, the bag landing now within the circle, but only barely. At the edge of the target, the husband tossed his second bag, and it landed within the target, a few inches off from the center. This repeated itself again for Akai's third and fourth throw. He made it within the target, but only barely, while the husband had great aim. "Sorry, Sonny, you'll have to do better if you want a prize," the old woman said with a smile, though Akai knew she was trying to goad him into playing and losing again. He stood up and said, "You have a go at it, Kid." Kid walked up and picked up the 4 bags left on the target by his feet. He looked back as his friends and did see Lacey was staring at one of the prizes in particular. He got a smirk on his face and readied himself. What happened next left the old couple stunned. Kid's blessing had given him not just speed, but incredible hand-eye coordination. While the old man's 4 bags were all close to the bullseye for the target by Kid's feet, Kid's bags were all stacked on top of one another, right on top of the bullseye. "Holy moly," the old man said, rubbing the back of his head. He couldn't deny that he lost this time, before saying, "Go on, Beatrice, give the boy a prize." Before Beatrice, the old lady, could pick out a prize for Kid, he walked up and said, "I want this one," and put his hand on a small wooden sculpture of a butterfly on a flower. It was a square of wood with the likeness carved into it. The old woman gave Kid it, who he then smiled and decided to turn around and give it straight to Lacey. Her eyes widened a bit and he said, "I saw you wanted it," to her. Lacey did give a warm smile after a moment and took it gently from his hands. "Thank you." Akai, Lamori, Lacey, and Kid continued to enjoy the festival throughout the day. Soon enough, the sun began to lower in the distance, and the villagers lit candles inside of hanging lanterns around the square. Chapter 11. Festival Night. The sun was setting, and most people were getting to the food by this point, and new food being cooked and brought out. Akai had a plate and loaded it with thin strips of fried greylock meat and oil-fried sweet bread. He sat down with his friends, Lamori having a large bowl of stew, Kid had a smaller bowl of stew and regular bread. Lacey had loaded her plate with just the sweet fried bread. Before they could start talking, they heard some singing break out along some music. Looking, they saw their parents and a number of the other village men all holding tankards of ale and looking a little flushed. They began singing a marching song. The song was about going to war and fighting to return home to a sweetheart. By the time they repeated the first few verses, more people joined in, and soon nearly half the people in the square were singing along. The song must be popular, though Akai admits he hadn't heard it enough to know to sing along. By the time it was done, Ray shouted, "Akai, come up here." Akai had a bad feeling about what his father wanted due to the face he was making. Lamori, you come too. Bring Kid with you, Drake called out. Soon the three approached and found their parents pushing them to the stage. Go, go, give us a demonstration of your powers, Ray said with a goofy smile on his face. What? Akai asked, looking back and only just now realizing his father may be a bit drunk. Show everyone what you can do. Come on, it'll be fun, Ray insisted. The three were pushed onto the stage, and now literally everyone's eyes were on them. Akai took a step back, not liking being the center of attention. But Kid wasn't so shy. Kid began to make electricity spark around him before doing a few mock punches and kicks at an incredible speed. In the reduced light of the evening, his electric arcs made blue streaks through the air. Then he did what he had been practicing, throwing out a kick and stretching multiple feet out was an arc of crackling lightning. It jumped to one of the hanging lanterns and did light the decorative piece on fire. Akai saw that and definitely didn't want it to spread. He had a sneaking feeling from the way Kid was smirking at him that he did this on purpose to make Akai do something. Akai reached his hands out and wisps of flame ignited in the air around him, covering him with a warm orange glow. The flame on the lantern was extinguished as it leapt from the hanging lantern to his hand, before joining the wisps of orange flame around him. Akai then focused, and the candle inside the now damaged lantern reignited, letting its light shed back on the ground below. Akai looked at Kid with wide eyes and said, "You can shoot out your lightning that far now." And Kid stood and looked proud. With a sigh, Lamoury walked over to Akai and asked, "How do I show off what I can do?" Akai blinked and thought for a moment before saying, "Throw me up in the air as high as you can," he said. Then, with a devious smile, Lamoury crouched and wrapped her arms around Akai's legs. He quickly spouted, "Wait, just one sec," before Akai felt himself launch into the air, the wind rushing by him as he closed his eyes. By the time he felt himself reach the peak of his ascent, he looked down and saw he was well over 50 feet in the air. As Akai fell, fear crept into his heart. In a mild panic, fire began enveloping him, looking like an off-pyrotechnic from the distance. Lamoury stood under him to catch him as he tried to brace himself. But the stage they stood on was not the most sturdy, and in a flash of orange light, Lamoury found herself holding Akai as her feet punched straight through the wood beneath them. She was up to her chest in the stage, and Akai held above her. Everyone began clapping and cheering after that stunt as Akai was trying to catch his breath. He shakily said, "Let me get ready next time," as Lamoury set him down, then began trying to climb back up. Kid quickly zipped over and did help, mostly giving her something to pull with since he didn't really need to help in the pulling department. Once the cheering died down a little, Kid's mother sat down behind her harp again. She only played it early during the celebrations, but quit after about 20 minutes. Akai didn't miss that she had some cloth wrapped around her wrists now in a compression wrap. Liam helped lift it up and asked, "Mind making some room on the stage and fetching something to patch that hole with?" He asked Kid, who turned to look back. "Sure thing, Dad." Akai and Lamoury stepped off the stage as Kid brought back a few boards from behind the stage. A few other villagers came up and they worked to replace it as if they expected a little damage. Liam placed Christie's harp on the stage and an older villager came up. Not quite as old as their elder, but old enough to be Akai's grandfather. A younger man was carrying a chair and the older guy's instrument. It was a strange kind of violin. Christie took a deep breath as the guy sat down and spoke up. "I wanted to end the night's celebrations with a song I wrote myself. I don't get to play much anymore, as some of you know. But I feel it's time I finally tell everyone." Liam stood behind Christie as she sat, a hand resting on her shoulder comfortingly. She said, "I do have an ailment, something the healers couldn't fix, and part of why I moved away from the city to be here. Slowly, I am losing my ability to use my hands. The same thing happened to my mother and her mother before her. It only afflicts women in my family, so thankfully my son will be okay. But this very well may be the last year I can play a performance on my harp." The older gentleman spoke with a gruff but kind voice. "For the dullards among us, pipe down and enjoy the music. Mrs. Fuller is a great musician, and this song is a nice one to dance to if you've a partner. Be grateful she's doing this, 'cause it hurts for her to strain 'em so much. After the surprising news, the mood of the festival did calm down a little, but people did seem eager to listen to the song. The older gentleman held his instrument and began the song with a long bass note. Akai and the others saw the villagers begin to break into pairs. The beautiful sounds of the two-piece music filled the air, Christie's harp playing being melodic and very technical in play instead of casual plucking like before. The older gentleman's playing was smooth and steady. Kid looked a bit shocked when they looked at him. He was unaware of this condition his mother had, and suddenly being told now he didn't know how to feel. His mother normally had such a fiery spirit, but right now the red-headed woman seemed melancholic as she played the song she had written. Kid soon felt a gentle hand on his arm and saw Lacey there. She had a gentle smile as she gently grabbed onto his wrists and silently began guiding Kid in a dance. Lacey wasn't very good and was trying to mimic some of the people around her, but Kid picked up on this and decided to follow along. He didn't ask why she was wanting to dance with him, but it was a bit comical for others looking to see. Lacey was a bit over a foot taller than Kid was right now. Lamori and Akai looked at each other as they watched Lacey drag Kid to dance to the music. Of course, Liam saw this. Christy was focused on playing her music, but would catch glimpses when she looked up. After watching for a moment, Lamori did look down a bit as a faint redness did creep across her face. Thankfully, the candlelight helped hide it. She did ask, "Do you want to try and dance too?" as she stared down at her shoes. Akai turned to look and couldn't discern the strange look Lamori had on her face. He sat in awkward silence for a moment before saying, "Sure, I don't mind." Soon the two did get up. Looking at how some of the other people who were dancing were doing it, Akai grabbed Lamori's hands gently and began to move. Strangely, Akai felt the warmth in his chest building, though this time the emotion being surfaced with it wasn't anger or determination. He didn't know what it was, but a faint golden glow flickered behind his eyes. Lamori missed it, acting uncharacteristically shy right now. Akai didn't know why, though, but as they moved, gently holding hands, something strange happened. When he fought Kel and then explosively attacked the Greylock, Akai remembered his body moving on instinct. Muscle memory for movements he hadn't done before. And now the same thing was happening as they danced. Akai stepped forwards and brought Lamori close. The dance changed from an awkward dance between kids to something that looked practiced and refined. It was not a well-choreographed dance, but it did step with the rhythm of the song. A smile crept onto Akai's face as he followed the instincts he felt and let his body move the way it wanted to. Lamori easily followed his lead, though she was stumbling every now and then as he moved unexpectedly. Her face grew red as she did not expect Akai to take the lead like this. When the song did end, they slowly came to a stop and Akai let go of her hands. Lamori brought them to her chest and looked up at him, seeing the flicker of gold behind his blue eyes. She turned away and said, "Thank you, B, but I better head home before it gets too dark." Akai reflexively said, "I could help," but Lamori cut him off and shook her head, saying, No, I'm fine. Thanks," with a flustered look before she began walking off. A few of the nearby adults chuckled as they heard and saw what happened. Akai looked clueless, though. "Odd," he muttered as the heat he felt in his chest slowly disappeared. The faint light behind his eyes dimmed. He turned and looked for Kid and Lacey, finding her slinking away as Liam had started talking with Kid. Christy stepping down from the stage and flexing her fingers with a faint grimace on her face. Next thing Akai knew, his father put a hand on his head and ruffled his hair a little. He turned and saw both of his parents standing there with smug looks on their faces. Ray teasingly said, "She still isn't your girlfriend, Akai." Akai had a genuine look of confusion for a moment before he shook his head. Afterwards, Ray had an amused look and Jennifer had a pitying look on her face. She sighed and said to Ray, "He's denser than you were." With that, the night did come to a close. Akai and Lacey headed home with his parents. Lamori went back home with her parents, and Kid stuck around to spend time with his parents and help disassemble the stage. The following day, Liam gathered a group and headed out, taking a trek around the mountain that is mostly north of the village. They followed the normal trail and did not have to deviate to the mountain pass that was made ages ago as a secondary route. They made it to the city, made the report, and came back after buying a few things they knew the village or their families either needed or wanted. It was a week later, 3 days of travel each way and a day to rest in the city, when Liam and his group came back. Akai's home village had no interesting events happen over the next year. The winter passed without much issue. The winter was particularly mild. Their village was rather south of most of the country, so it did not snow much during the winter. A week with a snowstorm was the only notable moment, but the rest of the winter had passed without much issue. Akai's hair reached his shoulders by this point. He was sitting beneath the oak tree in the field, this year having various rows of vegetables growing instead of more grain. By now he could manage keeping a good tenth of his fire swirling around him, golden at all times. He didn't feel pain until he pushed it a little further. He couldn't maintain it in sparring yet. Progress had been slow with him training by himself. Kid and Lamori were helpful, but this is just something he had to do on his own. He was interrupted by footsteps approaching through the field. He opened his eyes and saw Lacey was standing there. She held her hands together in front of her and asked, "Could you do me a huge favor, Akai?" Chapter 12, Elmswick City. Akai found himself holding a backpack and marching through the woods. By his side was Lacey, who had her hair tied back and wearing a cloak over her clothes. By Lacey was Akai's mother, Jennifer, who also wore a cloak. In the rear of their group was Kid, marching confidently as they walked along the rough dirt road through the forest. "Thank you for agreeing to come along," Lacey said, adjusting the backpack on her own shoulders. "It really isn't an issue," Jennifer said back. "I hadn't been to the city in a while, and I'm sure Akai would enjoy the trip too." "Yeah, I've been wanting to see what it's like." Finally, after a long time of marching, it was getting too dark to see comfortably. Lacey sat down and rubbed her legs, aching from far more walking than she was used to with more weight than she was accustomed to. The rest put their packs down, Akai and Kid beginning to set up their camp, pitching 2 tents and setting a small fire pit in a clearing by the road. "This is going to be the first night I spend so far away from home," Akai mentioned, his mother then smiling and agreeing. "You've never left the village yet. So yeah, if I remember, it's going to be roughly 3 days of walking at this pace to get to the city. Well, as long as nothing is blocking the way." The 4 of them quickly settled in, Akai easily lighting a fire by little more than a wave of his hand. Preparing some of the food that Jennifer had packed, they got a simple soup going before heading to bed. Akai and Kid have to share a tent, and Lacey and Jennifer share the other. They only brought 2 tents to save on weight. As Akai fell asleep, he found himself waking up in the body of the Phoenix King again as he dreamt. This time he was younger than last time, and not yet king, just Ken of the Phoenix clan, roughly around 16 in age. Wearing loose clothes meant for training in, he sat on the sandy ground of a training field in front of his father. "Focus on the feeling within your heart, Ken, and bring it forth slowly." Ken would close his eyes and focus, soon feeling an ember residing within himself. He tried to bring it forwards, and after a minute of effort, he soon opened his eyes and the yellow glow of his fire appeared behind them. "Good, you can feel and pull the flames within you. The Phoenix's fire is a powerful thing, but it is also dangerous if not managed." The father adjusted himself and said, "It is an aggressive fire and must be burnt when it is born. If you let too much linger within yourself, it will burn you too." Ken lost his concentration and looked up, a bit worried about this. He asked, "What do you mean? How do you use it if it will hurt you?" "Unlike sorcery, where you stockpile the energy within yourself, this fire must be used as it is formed. You will feel when it is done wrong, and if you don't push it, you won't have any lasting damage." The father gestured to Ken and said, "Go, ignite the smoldering ember within yourself, but do not release its heat." Worriedly, Ken nodded. He closed his eyes and focused, calling on the Phoenix's fire within himself, and did not expend it. He brought it to the same level he was at before and felt nothing. But as he let it grow into a small flame, it took no time before severe burning pain filled his chest. He let go of the fire and it receded, Ken clutching his chest and gasping for air. "You see, it is quite painful. Do not push the pain of your fire beyond that level, or else it will cause you many problems. Control how much of it you call forth, and always control how fast you use it to match. Ken took a minute to recover from the sudden pain and let it slowly fade. He then asked, "And the limits?" He asked, recalling a memory that Akai could feel was there, but not see himself. As your body grows stronger, the amount of fire you command will increase. Should you try and command more than you can control, it will end in disaster. It will burn your own life to sustain itself if left unchecked. Ken nodded and reassumed his formal sitting position. His father got up and planted a hand on his head. "Train well, my son." The rest of Akai's dream was Ken practicing controlling the fire he could bring to bear, staying just beneath the limit of what he could handle. Suddenly, Akai was awoken in the early morning. The sun had yet to rise, but the sky was beginning to shift from black to blue. Kid was shaking him and groaning, "Damn it, Akai, stop that. You're making the tent unbearably hot." As Akai sat up, he yawned and asked, "What? What are you talking about?" Kid jabbed a finger into Akai's chest and said, "You," before retracting his finger and shaking it. "Do you not feel how hot you are? If you didn't have fire magic, I'd be worried you were cooking alive from a fever." Akai looked down at himself and not just now felt it did feel a little warm. He got out of his blankets and stepped out of the tent, feeling the cool morning air. Akai was a bit confused, but he remembered the dream. He decided to see if what he was thinking was true and relaxed. And just as he thought, Akai felt an ember in his chest subside, and the air around him suddenly felt a good bit colder. "Was I doing that in my sleep?" he muttered to himself. He sighed and decided to go ahead and get breakfast ready, since it will be morning soon enough. Gathering a few sticks to stoke the embers of the campfire, he began to heat some water and warm up some of the food left over from last night. By the time it was ready, he saw some movement coming from the other tent. The canvas flap parted to reveal a sleepy-looking Lacey who had yet to brush her hair. "Good morning." She yawned before stepping out of the tent, followed by Jennifer a few moments later. Kid was the last one to actually get up and get something to eat. When they finished breakfast, did their morning routines and pack up camp, Akai readied his backpack, which was mostly filled with the tent. With that, they went back to walking down the road. Akai walked in front and Kid took the rear, so if by some freak accident they were attacked by a monster, Jennifer and Lacey wouldn't be in harm's way. They walked and noticed dark clouds beginning to form overhead, and surely enough, around noon, they felt the first few raindrops. Akai and the group set up under some trees. Akai and Kid used the oilcloth from their tent kits and set up a dry place to sit. Jennifer and Lacey definitely did not want to walk through mud. They all sat together under the shelter and decided to wait for the rain to pass. It let up after a few hours, but maintained a light drizzle and didn't seem like it would actually stop soon. "I think we should keep going, because there's no guarantee it won't continue to rain later." And the rest agreed. After taking a few minutes to pack up, they began their trek again. The group walked and passed the fork in the path that heads up to the mountain, and it looked like they would need to take the detour. Around 20 minutes of walking past the fork, where the path ran between a cliff and a river. Normally, even after rain, the path was safe to travel, but today the path was blocked. A mudslide had ran down from the cliff and rendered the path non-traversable. "Do you think we can get past it?" Lacey asked, holding her hood up to keep the light drizzle from hitting her face. "No, this is all too soft. We'll get stuck in it," Akai said, trying to step on some of it, but pulling back before hit boot got stuck in the mud. "We need to head back and take the mountain pass," he said. Lacey's shoulders slumped and muttered, "I might need someone to carry me," she muttered. Jennifer sighed and said, "All right, let's head back." The group walked back, this time Kid taking the lead. They went to the branching path and began to ascend the mountain. Come the evening, they set up camp again. Akai asked, "How long is the mountain pass detour, Mom?" And Jennifer said, "It's going to take us an extra 2 days of walking." Hearing this, Lacey groaned. She sat down and was rubbing her own feet. Taking the time to set up a campfire, eat some food, they all went to bed. Kid said, "And don't do that thing again and make it stupid hot in here again." "I'll try not to," he said as he laid down under his blankets. 2 days later, the group were heading down from the mountain. Kid had ran ahead a bit to scout. They had heard some odd noises coming from the area last night, so they were a bit on edge right now for what could be out there. Kid and Akai were worried about another greylock, while Jennifer and Lacey thought it was just a wild animal and not too much to be worried about. Walking, and more walking, they soon left the forest on the north side of the mountain and were entering a set of sparsely wooded plains. In the distance, they saw a walled city and saw many carriages and groups of people walking to and from through a set of gates. Above each gate, flags flew of the kingdom of Lagonia and the city's own crest, a wide-branched elm tree. "And there's Elmswick City," Jennifer said, smiling as they finally were in sight of the place. "Let's go," she said, urging the rest to keep walking. Finally, in the clear, Akai and Kid walked by the sides of Jennifer and Lacey, reaching a more pronounced road and soon waiting in a short line to enter the city through the gate. "Why can't we just go in?" Akai asked, and Jennifer said, "Because they're doing identity checks. It wasn't that long ago we were having a border conflict with the Ryneveld dynasty to our west, though I don't know exactly why they're doing it." After a few minutes, it was finally their turn to head through the gate of the city. Akai looked up at the large gate with huge iron reinforced wooden doors currently propped open with a squad of guards watching over it. A number of men wearing surcoats over chainmail and padded clothes with kettle helmets stood, most leaning on spears and arming swords hanging at their hips. There was a woman in the same armor standing among them, holding a ledger as she jotted down the names of people entering and leaving. Though Akai was a bit weirded out by her appearance, the woman had a head similar to a cat's with fur, whiskers, even pointy ears on her head. She did have longer hair on her head, kinda like a normal human's, but it was cut short. She reminded Akai of a brown tabby that lived in the village back home. He didn't realize it was their turn and that he was staring. She spoke in a mostly normal voice, but had an odd accent. "Hey kid, it's rude to stare, you know." Akai blinked and said, "Oh, I'm sorry," he said quickly before saying, "I've never seen someone like you before." "I can tell," she said dryly in reply. Looking over the four of them, she looked at Lacey first. What is your name?" Lacey almost flinched at being spoken to so directly by this beast woman. She said a bit timidly, trying to pull the hood of her cloak to hide the burn scar still visible on her face. "My name is Lacey." An awkward silence followed before the beast woman said, "And your last name?" Lacey looked a bit worried at first, stuttering for a moment before Jennifer stepped in, putting a hand on Lacey's shoulder and confidently saying, "Ryneveld." Akai and Kid looked up at Jennifer but quickly caught on that she was telling a white lie. Lacey had never actually told any of them what her last name was, or if she had one. Akai had assumed she didn't have one until now. "Sorry, my daughter's quite shy. Please excuse her," Jennifer said, an unamused coming from the beast woman in response. "My name is Jennifer Ryneveld, and this is my son, Akai Ryneveld," she said, gesturing at Akai. The beast woman wrote in the book. Akai could see her hand was covered in fur too. "And the redhead?" she asked. Kid smiled and said, "Kid Fuller, son of Liam Fuller." "Fuller, huh?" the beast woman said as she wrote down the name in the ledger. She thought for a moment before saying, "Oh, I remember him," before idly commenting, "He still owes me 20 silver, then waving the group through. "All right, go on in," she said. Kid looked confused after overhearing that comment, but seeing Akai's mother walking ahead, he quickly moved to keep up. The four of them heading into Elmswick City. Walking in, Akai and Lacey were met with sights they hadn't seen before. So many people walking through the streets, most buildings were either 2 or even 3 stories tall. Down the road in the distance, they can even see an elevated section separated by another set of walls, and past that is a castle with a towering keep. 2 flags flying from a pole at the very top of the tower. The lower flag is the city's flag. The larger flag above is the flag of Lagonia. Chapter 13, Elmswick City 2. After walking, Jennifer found a place for them to stay at. She led the 4 of them into an inn just down a side road from the main road. It was a small 2-story place with a dining room, not much bigger than their own at home, with 3 small tables. Enough for 2 or maybe 3 people to sit at. There was a counter separating the dining area from a kitchen, and part of it was sectioned off to act as a reception. Sitting at the counter was a young kid, a girl no older than 6 or 7, and was drawing on some scrap pieces of parchment, doodling all sorts of odd things. Sitting behind the reception part of the counter was a tired-looking man, undoubtedly the girl's father. He had a book over his face and was asleep until a bell began ringing above the door. "Ooh, ooh, are you travelers?" the kid immediately piped up, sitting and spinning around in the stool she sat on. Jennifer couldn't help but give a small smile at the sight of a cute kid, reminding her of a younger Akai. "Yes, we were wanting to get 2 rooms if they're available." 2 Ligonian silver coins, the father said as he pulled the book from his face. "We don't take foreign currency." Jennifer produced a small coin purse and pulled out 2 silver coins. Akai knew money was going to be more common in the city than at home. Back home, they mostly just did favors for one another, unless it was someone traveling through the area. After taking the coins, the guy reached under the counter and produced 2 keys with little tags hanging from them. 1 and 2, which made sense when the group headed upstairs to put down their things. There were only 4 rooms upstairs, labeled 1, 2, 3, and owners. This place was quite small for sure. "Well, I at least knew we could afford this place. The bigger inns on the main road aren't this cheap," she muttered, unlocking the doors and then handing Akai and Kid the key labeled 2. "You 2 share a room, me and Lacey will share the other." Akai nodded and walked in with Kid, setting down their backpacks, seeing the rooms very basically furnished. 2 straw mattress beds, 1 dresser and a coat rack. After setting their things inside and deciding which bed they would take in the evening, they walked out and locked the doors. Akai smiled and decided to wait downstairs with Kid until his mother and Lacey were ready, which only took them a few minutes. Downstairs, Jennifer and Lacey would find Akai and Kid innocently playing with the owner's daughter. When Jennifer reached the bottom step, she said, "All right, let's go. We'll be back this evening." Akai and Kid waved by as the girl was upset to not have people to play with anymore and headed out. This time, Lacey was leading them and said, "I just want to check something," as she seemed to be in a fairly serious mood. Akai and Kid walked with them. Kid was leery of pickpockets, but Akai was a bit too naive about city life to focus on that. He was busy looking around and still amazed at just how many people were out and walking around. About 20 minutes of walking later, Lacey led them to a residential district with solid but rather small houses, the neighborhood suggesting this area was for the poor, but not completely destitute like slums. She was counting the houses before they found one that had visibly been rebuilt recently. Some of the stone foundations still had char marks from fire, and all of the wood was new and mostly unweathered, unlike the rest. Less than 10 years if Akai had to make a guess, while the others are much older. Lacey stood in front of the house and seemed to stare a bit wistfully. Jennifer approached and asked, "You okay?" when she saw the misty look in Lacey's eyes. Before Lacey could answer, they heard the door creak as a woman answered the door. She was around Jennifer's age, but the first thing Akai and Kid noticed about her was how short she was. Akai and Kid both were taller. A dwarven woman opened the door and stood, still wearing an apron and tied-up hair. "Can I help you lot?" she asked. And a darker look covered Lacey. She hesitantly but politely asked, "What happened to the people who used to live here?" The dwarf squinted at Lacey and leaned on the open doorway, saying, "Why, who's asking?" Jennifer gently patted Lacey on the back to try and comfort the teenager as she responded, "My parents used to live here, with an older brother and sister. It was around 9 years since I was here." "Oh," the dwarf said, catching on to what Lacey was saying, "Sorry to tell you this, girl, but nobody knows. House burnt down 6 years ago. Nobody's seen 'em since. City guard was all over the place before they started rebuilding. Could check with their office." Lacey looked down, not liking the ideas that were going through her head. Did they run away? Did they die in the fire? Did that slaver come back for them? These thoughts made Lacey clench her fists and shake a little before taking a deep breath and forcing herself to calm. Quietly she said, "Thank you for the answers," before giving a polite bow and turning, starting to walk back. "If she's who I think she is, poor girl isn't going to like the truth," the dwarven woman muttered under her breath before reaching up to the handle and shutting the door to the house. Lacey headed back to the main road and was shaking a little now as her worries and thoughts mounted. "Lacey?" Jennifer asked, and Lacey replied, I want to head to the City Guard main office, she answered. Do you know where it is? Jennifer asked. I think so. I know it should be in the inner city. All right, we'll follow you, Jennifer said as she looked back to make sure Akai and Kid were still with them. Akai nodded confidently and Kid said, You can count on us. The group headed down the main road, heading towards the center of the city. It was now a little past noon. Minutes later, as they were walking, they were passing a fairly large church, and they were stopped by one of the priests walking out. They were wearing an interesting set of robes. Excuse me, the priest said, looking over the group, their eyes lingering on Akai and Kid. Pardon the intrusion, but, well, I have a question. Jennifer looked back at Akai and Kid and raised an eyebrow. They both seemed confused before the priest continued. You don't happen to have a newly blessed among you, do you? Akai scratched the back of his head, and Kid answered, Yeah, me and Akai here had awakened about a year ago. The priest's eyes widened a bit, followed with a genuine smile. Come, please, we at the church could feel the wisps of divinity from you. At least offer a prayer while you're here. Akai and Kid looked up at Jennifer, who took a moment to think. She asked Lacey, You aren't pressed for time, are you? Lacey stood there and softly shook her head, saying, I just want to get there before sundown. Oh, don't worry, I don't plan on taking more than a few minutes of your time, the priest said, turning to walk back to the large church building. Inside, there were a number of priests cleaning some small shrines set up in the honor of gods, and they stopped to look at them as Akai and Kid entered. Some of the devout seemed able to feel that they were awakened. Some of the others reacted to the devout turning their heads to look and didn't seem to be able to sense it. As they entered, Kid felt an odd calling. He stepped in and slowly walked to a shrine that had a small painting of a valiant knight in ornate armor, darkened steel with a gold trim. Wielding sword and shield, a legion of soldiers standing behind them. The painting was obviously a copy, but it was still made in respect of the god. But the feeling of detail being lost was there. The plaque showed this was a shrine to Anku, the god of war. Akai followed Kid, curious why he walked off so quickly. The priests watched as Kid held a hand to the shrine set up, and blue lightning crackled around his hand involuntarily. I can feel a connection, Kid whispered. Afterwards, he pulled himself together and stepped back, seeing the priests around the temple softly clap at his display. Then their gazes turned to Akai expectantly. He turned and looked, seeing only 6 shrines in the temple. He looked and saw one for Svendar. Akai approached it but felt nothing. He stared at the small painting of a man in red robes with a northern style to them, holding a grand red-shafted spear, but felt nothing in return. I don't feel anything, Akai said, and one of the priests asked, Are you sure Svendar is the god who blessed you? Thinking about it, Akai shook his head. My father's friend thought it would be Svendar, but I don't feel anything. Please, let me see the nature of your power, the priest said, gently grabbing Akai's extended hand and holding it. I will help you. Let me see it, and tell me the words you were blessed with. Akai nodded and closed his eyes. He called upon the heat within his chest to a degree it did not hurt. Soon orange wisps of flame surrounded him, with streaks of bright yellow intermixed. The priests watched in reverence and listened closely when Akai said, A righteous fury burns within your heart. I'll help it ignite. Akai then let go of the heat, and his flames simmered down, sparing the priest further discomfort from the fire. They stood around and thought for a moment, before one said, Only 2 things come to mind, but only one makes sense. The priest, holding Akai's hand, muttered, Either this is a blessing of a minor deity and not one of the true gods, or you had been given a direct blessing from the immortal hero himself. The priests gasped at the suggestion. Brother Owen, go get the relic we have. Are you sure? It's the only one we have outside of the capital. Yes, if this boy has the blessing of the immortal hero, we must know. One of the priests walked off to the back room, not open to the public. Akai was curious and asked, Who's the immortal hero? What? The priests off to the side exclaimed. The head priest standing before Akai asked, Do you really not know? In a gentle voice. Akai shook his head. He said, We don't have any kind of church back home. Then I will give you a short lesson in the gods. The priest gestured to the 6 shrines set up. There are many beings we call deities. They have similar power to the divine, but aren't true gods. The difference is that the true gods are ordained by the world itself. They control their domains to ease the burden that the world bears to host us. There are 7 gods. We only have 6 shrines because a proper shrine requires a relic of the god to have a connection to them. First, there's Mioch, the god of strength and labor. His domain is straightforward, power over the mighty and the hard-working. The relic we have is one of many. It is a nail that Mio himself had forged. The painting is a depiction of what many who commune with him see. A strong burly man with short hair and dark-tanned skin. Second, there is Svendar. He is the god of wrath and retribution. He upholds oaths and is the patron to righteous berserker warriors. We have record of only one instance where he directly delivered divine punishment upon mortals, which is a story for another time. The relic we have is one of many spearheads he had left behind. As you see by the painting, he is a blond man with vermilion eyes, wearing northern red robes and wields a magnificent spear. Third, we have Neolenth, the god of death and ruler of the dead. He guides the souls of the fallen to the afterlife, and other than the wicked or the cursed, keeps them resting in peace. He has an endless chain used to bind those who try to defy the rules of death. One link is the relic we have, and as you see by the painting, he is a truly kind being. Fourth, we have Now, goddess of love, beauty and purity. She has domain over just that, the beauty of the world of things that exist within it. The love you feel is what she bestows and patron of all who are pure, in body or in soul. As you see by the painting, she has lovely white-purple hair and is truly gorgeous and innocent. Fifth, we have Andata, goddess of knowledge and of magic. She created the first sorcery, and those who study to learn are given the blessing to wield her power. She created the way to manipulate energy, to impose your own will upon the world in a limited fashion. The relic we have is a spell tome Andata herself had written. And as you see by the painting, she is a beautiful elf with violet hair, devout to studying and is truly incredible. Finally, we have Anku, the god of war, an invincible warrior in perfect armor, commanding legions. He is the patron of generals and strategists, and the relic we have is part of one of his swords. As you see in the painting, he really is an intimidating figure in that armor. And finally, the leader of the gods and the first among them, the immortal hero. Saying that, the priest from the back came forth carrying a simple item, a truly ancient crown. Withered to a point it can be barely recognized, and it sat upon a silk pillow. He brought an end to the first age when the elder gods had gone mad and tyrannical. Beset by the world itself to correct this mistake, he ascended from being a mere mortal like you or me and had slain them. This was thousands upon thousands of years ago. No record exists of just how much time had passed since then, but he eventually rose to divinity himself and brought together the rest of the true gods, bringing forth the second age, settling the chaos in between and allowing the first kingdoms of our time to come about. His name and appearance had long been lost to time, and he seldom ever responds to attempts to commune with him. When he speaks, it is always short and simple. Even when he gives blessings, something he hasn't done for nearly a century. Undoubtedly the strongest and most benevolent of the gods, he is also the most retreated from our world. As the crown was brought near, Akai felt the heat inside of his heart flare with a warm longing. He stared at it and couldn't help but feel an intense connection between it and himself. Akai didn't need to reach forwards. The crown suddenly became enveloped in a purple divine aura, and Akai's golden flame encircled him without Akai's need to control it. The two energies flared for a moment, feeling like both are two pieces of the same whole, separated for far too long. After 30 seconds, the energies slowly died down. Soon the ancient remnants of the crown returned to appearing mundane. Akai's flame took longer to return dormant, but it soon did on its own. All of the priests were looking at Akai and the crown in awe. It was obvious to any who saw that Akai shares a strong connection with the immortal hero. "You are the first in centuries, boy. Please, what is your name?" the main priest asked, kneeling down to Akai's eye level. Kid in the background is visibly a bit jealous that Akai stole the show. My name is Akai Ryneveld. It is truly an honor to meet you, Akai Ryneveld. The Church of the Divine will always welcome you. Chapter 14, Elmswick City 3. Shortly later, they left the church. As they walked off, Jennifer said, I have a feeling this isn't the last you'll be hearing about what just happened, Akai. Not with the commotion the priests were making. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it either, Akai admitted. Kid slapped his back and said, if you're going to do something like that, at least take pride in it, with a dejected voice. Contrary to what you might think, Kid, I don't like being the center of attention for everyone. If you say so, Kid countered. Eventually, about an hour of navigating the city streets later, they made it to the head office of the city guard. Just outside the second set of walls in the city, cordoning off the truly wealthy from the rest of the city. It wasn't exactly subtle that the office was here and not somewhere closer to the poorer areas. The guards needed to respond faster to issues when it was the rich and powerful asking for help. The four walked inside and saw a dark-haired man with an impressive mustache sitting at a desk, wearing the surcoat the guards wore but no actual armor. Quill in hand as he was writing things down. He put it down and looked up when he saw the four of them enter the office. G'day, what can I do for you? He asked in a fairly thick accent. None of them knew where it was from, but it did sound quite eloquent. I was wondering. Lacey spoke up before having to steel her emotions a bit. I am needing information on what happened to the residents of a specific house that burned down a few years ago. The guard clerk's eyes widened a bit before grabbing a new sheet of parchment and beginning to write on it. He asked, any specifics you can give? And Lacey nodded. It burned down about 6 years ago, should have been a couple with 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Lacey then began to list off the street name and district the house was in. After saying that, a glint of recognition sparked in the guard's eyes. May I ask who is asking, and why? He said, looking up from taking notes. My name is Lacey. She hesitated for a bit, visibly nervous to give more than her first name. Before Jennifer could step in and try and help, Lacey added, Lacey Lachute. The guard's eyes stared at her as he thoroughly examined her, eyes lingering on the bandages she still refused to go out without wearing, visible under the cuff of her sleeves, and the burn scar on her face. I remember what happened there, the guard said as he began to stand up. Lacey took a small step back, very worried what he was going to do. Akai saw Lacey's nervousness and was confused why she was reacting this way. Don't share that name with anyone else, Lacey. You know the reputation it holds. You're lucky I'm not half as superstitious as my boss is. Hearing him give advice, Lacey's shoulders did relax a little. I will need to write up a report about you being safe. There's still an open case for what happened to you. I understand, she said, relaxed shoulders now slumping a little as she was not looking forward to doing it. Now, about your family, the guard said, turning to look to double-check no one was listening to them in the office. Let's take a private room so no one could eavesdrop. You 3 can stay here. I promise nothing bad will happen. Jennifer looked a bit worried and took a seat. Akai and Kid joining them in one of the few chairs meant for people waiting. Just as they sat down, a larger man stepped in from the back and saw the desk empty. He grunted in irritation. Where in the hells did Vic run off to now? Thankfully unaware about what had just transpired. He and my... Akai said, thinking about the white lie they told the guard at the city gate for a moment. My big sister went to a private room to talk about something. Bah! The heavy man scoffed and sat down. He pulled out a local news pamphlet and leaned back in his chair to read it. If you lot don't need further help, keep it down, would ya? He said rather rudely. In the back room, the guard, Vic or Victor, took a seat and gestured to a chair for Lacey to sit. She did so and grabbed onto her dress in nervousness. About your family, I need to tell you their current location is unknown. What happened 6 years ago was tragic. Lacey listened intently as he said, Your father, still bitter about what your grandfather had done that left your family in bad standing, came to us with reports about you running away. Lacey gritted her teeth a little and shook her head. She said, I did not run away. He sold me off because I was sick and weak and couldn't help work to support us. Vic's look darkened at the news and nodded. He came with those reports, but soon became even worse after you left. When we weren't hearing about yelling coming from that house, we were hearing about him causing problems at the pubs. Then even getting into trouble with one of the local illegal potion gangs. One evening, we had a letter delivered to us from him, spewing nonsense like, "I know I'm not wanted in this city," and a threat that he was going to set fire to the district so nobody would deal with him or his ungrateful family again. Before Lacey's face could form more of a frown, the guard lifted his hands and said, "We brought in an awakened with fire affinity as soon as we could, and the fire never spread. We spent days combing the ashes, and I can guarantee you no one in your family was in that fire." A witness even said they saw them leaving with packed bags just before the fire started. Lacey had a few tears forming in her eyes, and dozens of wild emotions were raging within her. She was relieved that they were or should be still alive, but outraged at what her father had become and then done. She didn't care about her parents anymore for selling her off, but she just wanted to know if her older siblings were okay. "Thank you," she quietly muttered. Before Lacey moved to get up, the guard Vic asked, "Now, if you don't mind, please share your story of what happened to you over these past years." "Oh, well." Lacey hesitated before she started to retell an abridged version of her story. "It was 8 years ago I was sold to someone because my parents couldn't afford to care for me. I was a sickly kid and couldn't work to help support us. There I was kept around for a few months before a bandit leader named Kel took me. I definitely don't want to talk about that time," she said, shuddering. "But it was around 3.5 years ago I was taken in by a family, where they helped me for 2 years before Kel found me again, raiding the village." The guard asked, "We know about Kel and his band. We haven't heard any reports about them for a while." Lacey nodded and looked at the door. "That boy with the white hair out there, he and his father were coming back from hunting when Kel was rounding up me, his mother, and a few friends of their family, setting the village on fire. Kel was going to kill his mother, the woman standing out there, but Akai had awakened with a powerful blessing at that moment." "He's a blessed awakened?" Guard Vic asked. Lacey nodded and said, "Both of those kids are, but Akai was the first." She said, then recounting how Akai had dealt with Kel, answering questions that Guard Vic had before he could ask them. "Well then, how old are they now? They don't look 14 yet." "They're only 11 right now," Lacey admitted. She sighed and asked, "Is there anything else you need me to tell you?" as she looked down. "No, that covers about everything we need," the guard said, organizing his notes before slowly standing up. He opened the door and said, "If we hear anything about your family, I will make sure to send word to Rowan Village." "Thank you," she said, getting out of her chair and heading out, meeting back up with the rest of their little group. Looking out of the window, the sun was starting to set, and said, "I'm ready to head back to the inn now." Together, Lacey and the rest left and walked through the city as foot traffic was steadily dying down. They made it back to the inn they stayed at before nightfall, the owner's daughter reading out loud from a children's book as her father guided her. He looked up and acknowledged them, but didn't interrupt his little girl's reading. The four of them went upstairs and decided to call it a night. Akai would have a mundane dream this night. Instead, it was Kid who was having an unusual time. Kid found himself on the ground, coughing, weighed down with heavier armor than would be practical on the battlefield. Sword under his hand and a shield strapped to his arm. He was coughing as sweat rolled down his brow, reeling in pain from a hit. He slowly managed to recover and look up. He was somewhere indoors, as he could see by the pillars of black marble around him. The ground beneath him was made of tiles of its counterpart, white marble with black streaks through it. "What the hell? Where am I?" He wondered aloud. He could not see the ceiling or further than 100 yards due to an odd mist or fog. Before his thoughts could wander further, he heard a stern shout from a voice that shook him to his core. "On your feet!" Kid raised to his feet, with only moderate difficulty from the bulky armor. It was dull steel plates, but more than twice as thick as any battle-ready armor. He turned to see the voice and froze. In front of him, in lustrous blackened metal trimmed with pure gold, decorated with silver wire inlay, and radiating a light pale blue aura, stood a knight also wielding the same style of sword and shield. The only difference between them was this knight was more than 2 full heads taller than Kid, and a crimson cloak draped behind him. The sword Kid held was the exact same one he almost touched at the shrine to Anku. Before Kid was going to speak up, the knight said, "You are correct in your assumption of who I am. I have been instructed to train you properly, so I will. Now defend yourself." In an intimidatingly authoritative voice. Kid could barely react in time before he saw this knight moving in with incredible and deceptive speed. Kid barely raised his shield in time to defend, and sparks flew as metal on metal made contact. Kid focused to try and grasp his power before he suddenly found himself doubled over on his hands and knees again, coughing and close to throwing up from the pain. "The power you wield belongs to me. I will not let you lean on it as a crutch to avoid properly developing yourself," Anku shouted. "Every time you try, I will strike you just the same. Be thankful you are dreaming and not suffering any real injury." "Did it dreaming?" Kid asked, looking up and realizing the last thing he did remember was falling asleep. His eyes widened as he began to rise to his feet. "Defend," he said and moved in. Kid focused but did his best to refrain from touching the power of his blessing. He managed to block 2 attacks before electricity crackled around his feet. Kid needed space, but just as he began exerting the electricity through himself to kick away, he saw it. Anku stepped in with inhuman levels of precision, not a single ounce of energy wasted as he moved in and drove the pommel of his sword in Kid's stomach again. It wasn't just speed that made the attack unavoidable. Kid, on an instinctual level, knew there was no movement he could take that wouldn't be immediately countered. His body froze, accepting it would be the least painful move to make. Kid was doubled over on the ground again, contents of his dream self's stomach emptying onto the floor. Kid watched as it vanished barely a second later. No doubt left that this really was just a dream. "Your elemental magic only exists because of my blessing. You will not depend on power that is not truly yours. On your feet." This continued through the night. It was awful at first. But before Kid would wake up, he had improved some with defense. This apparition of Anku continued assaulting Kid fiercely with sword strikes, and Kid was able to parry or block for a good 10 seconds before being hit in the stomach again. "Rest, you will wake in a few minutes," Anku said, returning his own sword to a scabbard on his hip. "I cannot do this every night, but I will train you." Kid panted, and instead of getting back on his feet, sat down on the floor with a loud clanking of his heavy training armor. Kid asked, "Why? Heavy armor, if it's not for my body?" Kid asked. Anku crossed his arms and stared, his helmet's visor blocking any features of his face except for deep violet eyes staring into him. The gaze felt like it went deeper than mere looking, like Kid's whole soul was laid bare for Anku to inspect. "Your will," he said. "You have 3 things you must train to properly inherit my skill in battle. Your body, which will come in due time, your mind, which will be our next lesson, and your will. If you are lacking in one, you are no different than a grand castle built on top of a dune of loose sand. You will crumble and fall with the slightest shift." For the next few minutes, Kid sat on the floor and rested. Catching his breath, he had more questions. Before Kid could speak, though, he felt his consciousness being dragged away from this room. The misty fog enclosed on him, and he couldn't see anything. Until he found himself laying in bed, opening his eyes to the wooden ceiling above him. Kid sat up and rubbed his eyes. His body wasn't hurting, he felt rested and rejuvenated, but at the same time his mind felt tired, like he hasn't slept at all. That was actually kind of fun. He silently admitted to himself, smiling with a toothy smile at the thought of sparring with a literal god in his dreams. After everyone else woke up, Kid decided to keep what he dreamt to himself. He felt like he finally had something over Akai, but quietly worried Akai had something more than him in this field too. So he resolved himself to accept that not knowing for sure was better than feeling staged up by his friend again. The group of them was scheduled to leave back to Rowan Village today, but they didn't need to leave right away. After getting dressed and ready, Jennifer rounded them all up and began leading everyone to the shopping district, giving Akai and Kid a silver coin each to walk around and buy something they wanted. Jennifer proceeded to lead Lacey around and said, "No point in coming here without buying something for ourselves. I'll get you something," and proceeded to refuse to let Lacey turn down the offer for a gift. Lacey eventually decided to buy a nice but cheap necklace. It was made of brass and cheap because while it had a slot for a stone in it, there was currently no stone. Jennifer and Lacey enjoyed some street food as they walked, small pieces of fire-roasted meat and thinly sliced vegetables on skewers. They were looking for Kid and Akai. Unfortunately, it wasn't difficult to find them after a few minutes. "Let me go, you kebbit kisser," shouted someone in the center of a gathering of people. Jennifer saw guards coming from down the road and let out a long, audible sigh. Making way to the commotion, she saw Akai holding down a lanky teenager to the ground with wrists held together behind his back. In front of him, Kid was holding a small satchel and pulled out a circular trinket. "Didn't steal anything, did you? Then where did you get this thing me and my friend literally just bought?" Kid said, keeping only the circular trinket and tossing the satchel back to the ground. The teen on the ground struggled, but Akai wasn't budging. He planted his feet and tightened the grip on his arms just a little bit more to dissuade the thief from trying to force him off. "Sit until the guards get here," Akai said gently, and soon just that happened. Two guards made it through the crowd, saying, All right. "What on earth is going on here?" said one of the two guards. The teen started shouting nonsense like, "They're robbing me. I didn't steal that thing. And nobody saw me steal anything." But he was silenced by one of the guards tilting his head before shouting, "Quinn, is that you?" The teen immediately shut up and tried to turn to look. Akai let up and didn't stop him, and even let go when the teen, named Quinn, said, "You uncle." The situation resolved itself pretty quickly after that. The guard just took a quick statement from Kid and Akai, and the other guard, apparently this teen's uncle and familiar with their shenanigans, put the thief in shackles and said, "Will you ever learn your lesson? Stop fucking reaching into other people's pockets." And Jennifer was just glad Akai and Kid didn't get arrested on their first trip into the city. As they finally got ready to leave, Kid showed off what they bought. A circle with a triangle inside of it, and it split into 3 unique pieces, saying, "I was thinking we could get Lamori's mom to turn these into necklaces or something, so me, Akai, and Lamori can have something like a friendship necklace." Thankfully, no further issues arose as they packed up their things and started heading back home.